No one bowed to him. They called him the Trash Prince, Gilroshan, the third son nobody wanted. When his skill system finally appeared, he had one choice: take the X-rank Archmage class and become untouchable, or pick the F-rank Slave Gladiator and keep his head. He chose the Slave. While knights laughed at the boy who picked the weakest class in existence, he was quietly stacking power they couldn't see coming. While seasoned mages burned through years of training, he was absorbing everything, and the gap was closing faster than anyone realized. The kingdom thought they buried him with that choice. They had no idea they just created the most dangerous person in it. Drop a like if you're already hooked, and subscribe so you don't miss our next manhwa recap. A heavy stone door stands sealed within a dark chamber, while eerie blue light seeps from the cracks and fills the air with an unsettling silence. Ancient stone doors stand sealed in a crumbling chamber, glowing blue light seeping from cracks while the air shimmers with cold energy and silence. A figure launches into the air with explosive force and shatters the stone floor beneath him, while screaming that he will not yield an inch. A masked warrior leaps from the shadows and drives his blade downward toward the boy, who braces himself with a drawn weapon, his face twisted in terror as the air shatters around them. The man's pupils dilate into glowing red orbs and a bead of sweat rolls down his cheek as he grits his teeth in silent shock, while Korean text fragments explode around him like shattering glass. The beast lunges with a roar and snatches the man by his ankle, dragging him into the icy depths as he screams for help. A massive stone hand looms over the battlefield, its fingers curling as two warriors clash beneath it in a flash of steel and magic, their blades meeting with explosive force. A dragon-like warrior with fiery tendrils clashes against a massive monster squid, while the man beside him yells in shock at the sudden assault by the creature. The horned warrior stomps the ground and sends a shockwave that hurls the fallen man across the cavern, his roar echoing with violent force. The boy with glasses stares up in terror as the massive dragon looms over him with its mouth open and teeth bared, while embers fall around them and heat radiates from the beast's glowing red eye. The man stares upward with a single tear sliding down his cheek, while flames lick at the wall beside him and the heat warps the air around him. A knight swings his glowing blade and cleaves through a charging monster, sending sparks flying as the beast roars in shock. The armored man flinches as the red-haired woman raises her ornate staff, while he demands that she stop the spell, his face pale with fear. A man with a sword stands in the snow before a glowing purple portal, while the cold wind howls through the frozen forest. A radiant card materializes in the air, displaying a robed archmage with glowing eyes and outstretched hands, while bright blue light erupts from behind it to illuminate the surroundings. The young man with glasses stares forward with glowing red eyes, his expression hardening into cold resolve as shadows stretch downward around him. Empty shelves and scattered soda can sit in a dim storage room, their labels worn and faded under the gray light. A boy with dark hair sits before a glowing laptop screen, his hands poised over the keyboard and mouse as he stares intently at the bright display. The character stares forward with wide, intense eyes, his pupils shrinking in shock as the weight of a sudden realization settles over him. The screen displays a general chat message from Godog seeking someone who wants a second chance at life, establishing a moment of digital connection. A hand rests on a surface with fingers slightly curled, while tension builds in the moment as if waiting for an inevitable response. A man in a dark jacket reclines back into his office chair with arms stretched above his head, as an empty speech bubble floats near the ceiling. The young man reclines in a dark chair and presses his earbuds firmly into place, his gaze fixed forward with an expression of focused resolve. The boy's eyes widen in sudden shock as a sharp realization strikes him, his pupils dilating with dawning horror. A glowing figure stands before a circle of people and extends her arms while instructing them to look after those around them, as the group holds hands in unity. A man carries a large box marked Bongnam WSD 485T, while another man in the background shouts that they are behind on schedule and to hurry up, creating a tense atmosphere of urgency. A clerk stands behind the counter and wishes a customer a pleasant day ahead, while an intense black burst of energy erupts above his head, casting the scene in sudden tension. The man sits facing the glowing screen in a dim room, surrounded by empty soda cans and bottles, his posture still as he stares into the light. A dark-haired man reaches forward with both hands as golden cards float around him, while a title card reading God-Forsaken World, a world forsaken by God, hangs above, glowing with an aura of divine power and ancient magic. A man with dark hair and earbuds stares upward with wide, startled eyes as a shadowy burst of light flashes above him, his expression frozen in sudden shock. Empty soda cans and pencils lie scattered on the floor in a chaotic mess. A young man with dark hair and earphones leans forward over a desk, fingers curled near scattered papers, while smiling faintly as he considers chatting with someone for a bit, the dim room casting soft shadows across his face. Two hands strike laptop keys with rapid force, producing sharp tapping sounds that echo in the quiet room. A system broadcast declares that Jumping Tangerine accepts the second life, its white text glowing against a calm blue digital backdrop. Godog whispers a warning that the path ahead won't be easy, his voice carrying doubt through the blue haze. A young man with dark hair and earphones stares forward with a weary expression, his mouth slightly open as if mid-sentence or reacting to something unseen, bathed in dim indoor lighting that casts shadows across his face. A man types on a glowing laptop in a dim room, surrounded by empty cans and clutter, his posture tense as he works alone under the screen's cold light. A finger strikes the enter key with a sharp click, causing a bright starburst flash to erupt at the point of impact. A whisper from Jumping Tangerine declares that anything is better than what they have now, floating against a soft blue gradient background. A whisper from Godog confirms that the proposal sounds good, set against a calm blue backdrop. A young man stares at his laptop screen with wide, shocked eyes under a harsh overhead light, his mouth slightly open in silent disbelief as the glow illuminates his tense face in the dim room. A young man with dark hair and an earbud in his right ear stares forward with a tense expression, his mouth slightly open as if reacting to something unseen, while a jagged red symbol hovers above his head against a muted blue background. A young man with earphones stares forward in stunned silence, his pupils contracting sharply as a bead of sweat rolls down his cheek, the air thick with sudden tension. The young man's eye widens in shock as sweat drips down his cheek, his mouth open mid-scream while he demands to know what just happened, the air thick with sudden panic. A young man with blue hair recoils violently, his eyes wide and mouth open in a silent scream, as streaks of light slash across the dark room around him. A glowing blue light fills the small room and scatters sparkles around the bed and chair, creating a quiet and eerie atmosphere. A wired computer mouse dangles off the edge of a wooden desk, its cord taut and swaying slightly above a dark office chair in a dimly lit workspace. A hooded figure slashes their blade through the air with a sharp cry of effort, sending a visible arc of force streaking forward against the cloudy sky. 5 hooded figures stand in a misty ruin as one of them places a hand on another's shoulder, while a 6th person lies motionless on the ground, their presence casting an air of cold authority over the scene. A hooded man with a scarred, grinning face looms over a fallen figure while flanked by masked companions, as he declares that their mission is finally complete, his shadow stretching across the rubble-strewn ground beneath a stormy sky. A bound and gagged young man with wide, fearful eyes sits in a forest clearing, his hands tied tightly in front of him. A hooded figure stands over a kneeling captive and orders his gag removed, while blue magical energy crackles through the ruined stone courtyard around them. A hooded figure kneels and grips a bound man's throat, while the captive gasps in terror as his captor demands information about the hidden vault, mist curling around their legs in the ruined courtyard. A hooded man bares his teeth in a snarl of rage, his blue eye narrowed with fury against the misty backdrop. Kale's eyes widen in sudden shock as a sharp exclamation mark flashes beside him, his face flushing with the intensity of an unexpected realization. A hooded man grabs the boy by his collar and demands confirmation of his identity, while the boy trembles in fear as the man states that the face matches. The boy with reddish-brown hair stares upward in shock, his wide red eyes and open mouth reflecting sudden alarm as a golden halo appears above him. The hooded figure glares down at the back of a head, his mouth open in a demand for an answer, while a sudden sound effect emphasizes the intensity of the moment. A hooded figure stands with a drawn sword while another cloaked figure draws their weapon, as the speaker demands that the Republic and its people pay for their crimes, the air thick with tension. A bound boy with his mouth agape exclaims in fear, while the ruins of an ancient structure loom behind him under a twilight sky. A gloved hand grips a sword hilt tightly, as the blade hums with energy in the air. A hooded figure slashes downward with a glowing blade and cleaves through the young man, who screams in terror as he is cut open while the attacker demands that no one tries anything. A character with a drop of sweat on his cheek reacts in shock, exclaiming that there is blood, while a sharp sound effect rings out against the cold background. Kale narrows his blue eyes into a cold stare, his gaze piercing through the shadows as he demands to know who dares interrupt him. The boy stares forward with wide red eyes and a sweating brow, his mouth open in shock as he shouts that he is the trash-tier 3rd prince, the dark background pulsing with tension. The Russian vault stands framed in golden light with a neutral expression, as the narrative introduces him as the 3rd prince of the Vault magic empire known for his laziness and strange behavior. A man clenches his jaw and grits his teeth as a sharp sound pierces the air, his expression tight with sudden pain or strain. A man with short blonde hair turns his head in alarm as a cloaked figure emerges from the misty ruins, while he gasps that someone is there. The hooded figure strides forward and shatters the stone floor with a heavy impact, while the man in the background watches with wide eyes and clasped hands as dust billows into the air. A man grits his teeth and clenches his jaw in a silent scream of frustration, while the background blurs into indistinct blues. A hooded figure holds a sword steady against the younger man's throat while demanding that he drop his weapon, as sweat beads on the victim's forehead under the cold pressure of the blade. The man in the vest stares forward with wide red eyes and a trembling mouth, his face half-shadowed as he demands to know what is happening. A hooded figure holds a sword to the captive man's throat, while another masked individual stands guard nearby, as the tension thickens in the cold stone courtyard. A hooded figure with a sword stands over a fallen man in a dark uniform, while declaring that there is no escape, the air thick with menace and finality. The boy's eyes widen in terror and his body trembles violently as he stands frozen in fear, while the air around him crackles with blue energy. A character with a jagged mouth leans forward and whispers what kind of, while a single tear rolls down their cheek, creating an atmosphere of confusion and quiet sorrow. A hooded warrior raises his sword in a sharp upward arc as the air whistles past the blade, declaring farewell to his unseen target. The armored knight thrusts his sword downward with a sharp cry of "Ka-ta-a, noose," while the blonde-haired third prince watches from below, the air thick with impending violence. The boy clenches his teeth and squeezes his eyes shut in a grimace of intense effort, while shouting that he will not give up now, sweat dripping down his flushed cheeks. A hooded figure lunges forward with a drawn blade and slices through the air while shouting that he will not be stopped, his eyes burning with furious determination. The character's armored boot strikes the ground with heavy force, while a voice demands that no one enter the chamber tonight, the atmosphere thick with absolute intent. A figure in a blue suit stands on the precipice of a shattered cliff overlooking a devastated landscape, while a voice demands what happened again. The character winks and narrows their red eye while making a sharp sound, their expression playful and confident. A hooded man with a scarred face lunges forward to stab the blonde man in the back, his eyes wide with rage and desperation as the blade pierces through the fabric. A boy with short hair gasps in shock as a sword rests against his throat, while a sharp shadow looms above him. A boy with brown hair stands beneath a glowing blue holographic banner declaring that the game has begun, while storm clouds swirl ominously above him. The screen displays a notification that the player has selected the Vault Empire character, Gilrushan Elro de Vault, establishing the protagonist's identity within the game world. A boy with reddish eyes and light brown hair smiles broadly while standing in front of gray stone ruins, his expression radiating cheerful confidence. A knight stands on a rocky outcrop overlooking the city, his shadow stretching behind him as he declares that he is a master of that game. The character smiles broadly with teeth clenched in a strained expression, while a single bead of sweat rolls down the side of their face. A system notification declares that starting rewards of the player have been granted against a bright blue background. A notification displays that 3 stat points have been received, signaling an immediate system reward. A notification appears on a blue background declaring that 2 skill points have been received, signaling a system reward. A glowing blue interface displays the message that you have received the quest to escape crisis, marking the sudden onset of a critical challenge. A man stands with his back to the scene as a sword rests against his shoulder, while he demands stat points to improve his abilities and skill points to let him learn, surrounded by an atmosphere of intense focus. A person stands with their hands bound tightly in front of them, a somber atmosphere surrounding them. A character's jaw clenches as a bead of sweat drips down the side, while the sound of tension crackles through the air. A blue fate card materializes in swirling energy, while a voice demands that the player choose their character's fate, as another figure declares whether they live or die depends on this choice. 3 fate cards float in an arc above a glowing blue floor, while text establishes that 1 card must be chosen from a pool of 1024 to define unique stats and abilities. Blue background displays the caption that the cards are being shuffled. The protagonist stands before a swirling vortex of blue light and floating cards, while the system voice explains that choosing the right card requires skill, but which ones appear is pure luck, creating a tense atmosphere where everything depends on the single draw. Kale tilts his head upward and locks eyes with the towering shadow looming above, his expression sharpening into focused alertness as he prepares for whatever comes next. A figure shatters into a blinding flash of blue lightning, the impact cracking the air and scattering sparks across the dark void. The figure with brown hair stands facing 3 glowing white panels in a dark, smoky void, his back to the viewer as blue energy swirls around the light sources. The man stands motionless as a sword tip presses against his neck, his lips parting in a silent gasp while sweat beads on his cheek under the weight of imminent danger. A boy with orange hair holds 3 glowing cards while speaking, his expression filled with shock as blue energy swirls around him. The bound hand clenches into a fist and ignites with a bright blue glow, while the air shimmers around it in response to the sudden surge of energy. A boy with reddish-brown hair and glowing red eyes grins wildly while beads of sweat form on his cheek, as intense white light radiates from behind him. Glowing weapons descend toward a mystical sigil on the ground, while an unseen narrator explains that one of 3 cards always includes a close combat option to ensure reliable play. Several cards float in midair and display glowing star ratings, while an unseen narrator states that the average rank of those 3 cards is B. The boy stands with a bead of sweat tracing his cheek, his mouth slightly open in shock as he stares into the distance, the gray atmosphere heavy with tension. A hand presses forward and shatters a glowing magical barrier, while the sound of cracking ice echoes through the air. A glowing card materializes in the air, displaying a blindfolded slave gladiator bound by chains, while the label F-Rank Slave Gladiator appears at its base. The boy stands with his hands bound and a dagger at his back, staring in shock as 2 ornate cards float before him, while gasping that he does not understand. A gloved hand thrusts forward 2 ornate cards while blue energy flares around them, as the air crackles with magical power. A D-rank third-rate theater actor card materializes within swirling blue magical energy, displaying a 3-star rating above the character illustration while floating before a ruined stone cityscape. The bound man extends his hand toward 3 glowing cards floating above the ground, while a hooded figure holds a sword at his back and the air shimmers with magical energy. The boy's red eyes widen in shock as sweat beads on his temple, while he gasps that the power is overwhelming, his entire expression frozen in terrified awe. The boy lies beneath a glowing tome with intricate golden engravings, his eyes wide in shock as cards float around him amid swirling blue energy, while he wonders if it could be true. The character tilts their head and smiles, while shouting that they will not forgive anyone, their eyes gleaming with intense emotion. A hand points its index finger forward with sharp precision, while blue energy crackles around the tip and illuminates the hazy air. A blinding white rectangle erupts in a burst of blue flames, while the surrounding air shimmers with heat and light. A blinding burst of multicolored light erupts in the center of the void, shattering the darkness with a violent shockwave that radiates outward. A bound young man strains against his ropes with gritted teeth, as 2 glowing cards materialize before him in a swirl of magical light. The character's red-rimmed eyes widen in shock, their pupils contracting as they stare at something unseen. A blonde character stands still and watches a glowing rectangular card float above his head while shattering into multicolored shards around it, the air thick with magical energy. A bound hand clutches a glowing rectangular object as magical energy erupts around it, while the ropes tighten against the struggling wrist. The archmage stands with eyes closed and hands raised as purple petals swirl around her, while the title X-Rank ARCHMAG glows beneath her. The boy stares with wide, bloodshot eyes and a slack jaw as shock freezes his expression, while he gasps that this cannot be happening. A boy with short blonde hair stares in shock at a floating purple card surrounded by magical energy, his eyes wide and mouth open as sweat beads on his forehead. A figure dives backward through the air while a massive explosion erupts behind them, as they declare that if they are talking about the Archmage card, it is essentially the ultimate ranged DPS card. The hooded man holds a glowing card aloft between himself and the young man with the sword, demanding that he hand over the artifact or face immediate destruction. The young man with reddish-brown hair stands bound by thick rope around his wrists, his red eyes wide in shock as he stares forward, the dark crimson background pulsing with an ominous energy. The heavyset prince stands with a solemn expression as the narrator introduces him as the good-for-nothing prince, his form emerging from a dark void against a crimson background. The blonde man stands in shadow with a smug expression as ominous red energy swirls around him, while a voice declares that he has a background and bloodline as a key figure. A man in a fur-collared coat stands before swirling red flames, his face grim as he declares that the Vault Imperial family in the original story faces an ominous fate. A man with glowing red eyes channels crimson energy into his outstretched hand, while the narration states that he is known for having produced exceptionally talented mages for generations. A cloaked assassin lunges forward with a blade while floating cards drift in the air, as the hooded figure glares with cold intent and purple energy crackles against the ruined tower behind them. The man clenches his jaw in frustration and grits his teeth, as he mutters that the damn situation is unbearable, his expression tight with annoyance. 3 illustrated character cards float against a stormy purple sky as the narrator explains that only 3 unique skills per card are immediately usable, including the Archmage's defensive skill called Field Domination, with swirling energy and distant ruins framing the scene. A hand hovers above a swirling vortex of fire and light as the magical energy surges upward with intense heat and crackling sparks, while an unseen voice explains that its effect only applies to magic or enchanted objects. A man stands with arms outstretched as swirling green energy coils around his torso and limbs, glowing against the backdrop of an intricate blue magical sigil that pulses behind him. A young boy with red eyes and a tear streaking his cheek grits his teeth in anguish, as blood blooms across his chest from an unseen wound, the air thick with silent suffering. A glowing X-Rank Archmage card floats amid swirling purple energy, radiating light from its center while casting an ethereal glow over the ruined surroundings. A mouth opens slightly as a small puff of breath escapes into the air, suggesting quiet speech or sudden realization against a soft gradient background. A young man with red eyes and a sword at his throat stares in frozen shock, mouth slightly open as if gasping for air, while ruins loom behind him under gray skies. A stout man in blue stands with his back to the viewer as cloaked figures surround him in a ruined courtyard, while he recounts how they forced him into another body and admits he does not know their motive, under a gray sky lit by floating magical portraits. The character's glowing red eye narrows with lethal focus, casting a sharp shadow across their face as blood drips nearby, signaling imminent violence. The young man's eye widens in shock as a single tear rolls down his cheek, his earbuds still plugged in, the air thick with silent dread. A bound blonde man thrusts his finger upward to activate a glowing blue interface, his eyes narrowed in fierce concentration as the hologram flickers to life against the stormy night sky. The system prompt displays the selection of an F-rank fate titled Slave Gladiator and asks for confirmation, its pale blue background humming with sterile digital stillness. A man with shadowed eyes smiles faintly while dark claw-like marks float around his head, radiating an eerie purple aura. A young nobleman stands rigid with wide-eyed shock as magical energy erupts from the ornate box he holds, while a sword lies discarded at his feet and glowing particles swirl around him in the misty courtyard. A young boy with glowing red eyes stares forward in frozen shock, his mouth slightly open and brows furrowed as if witnessing something impossible, the air thick with silent dread. Two blue system notifications hover over a ruined cityscape under falling snow, announcing the automatic equipping of an F-rank Slave Gladiator card and the acquisition of 3 exclusive skills, accompanied by a sharp digital chime. The blonde boy glares with bloodshot eyes and gritted teeth while gripping a blade, his face twisted in fury as he demands to know who dares challenge him, the air thick with violent intent. A blade presses tightly against the character's throat, drawing a sharp intake of breath as the steel glints coldly under the overcast sky. A young man with glowing red eyes stares forward with a faint, chilling smile, his face half-shadowed as if lit by an unseen fire, radiating silent menace. The words "game resuming" float in a clear blue sky, signaling the world systems are reactivating with quiet inevitability. A hooded figure swings a glowing blade upward through the air, sending shockwaves rippling outward as red impact marks flare around the motion, his face twisted in exertion beneath the shadow of his cowl. A hooded figure stands over a fallen comrade who groans in pain, while the wind whips through their cloak and mist swirls around them. A cloaked figure stands with their back forward facing 4 masked assassins in a misty forest, while one of them speaks from above, the air thick with tension and unspoken threat. A hooded figure with a masked face and silver eyes stares forward with cold intensity, as they demand to know who dares approach them, their voice sharp against the misty forest backdrop. A boy in a white shirt and dark vest gasps for air as his hands clutch at the thick rope around his neck, strangled into silence while shouting sounds of distress fill the cold stone corridor. The masked figure with brown hair flinches in shock and stares at the hooded opponent, while red exclamation marks emphasize his sudden alarm. A boy in a hood stares forward with wide, terrified eyes as sweat drips down his face, while screaming that he is scared. A notification confirms a skill has been used successfully, while declaring that the ability cannot be activated again for 24 hours. A light blue screen displays the text "Preference for Masochism," detailing that non-lethal damage grants greatly increased regeneration for a 15-minute cooldown. The screen displays text describing a flashy move that causes dramatic bleeding but deals minor damage, with a cooldown of 15 minutes. A light blue background displays white text describing a game mechanic, with the title "Preference for Restraint" above rules stating that bound characters can ignore 1 instance of fatal damage and a cooldown of 24 hours. A person's hands are bound tightly with rope, their body clad in a dark suit, creating a sense of helplessness. 3 hooded figures in dark cloaks stand before a man with blonde hair, their leader stepping forward as he addresses the third prince, while 2 others flank him with drawn swords, the air thick with tension. The hooded man with blue eyes narrows his gaze and bares his teeth in a snarl, while demanding that no one stands between him and his target, the air thickening with lethal intent. A man with light brown hair and red eyes screams in terror, his face contorted in fear as the background darkens to a menacing red. A hooded figure with silver hair stares forward with narrowed, intense eyes, his expression locked in cold determination as the wind tugs at his dark cloak. A hooded figure stands with arms crossed in the foreground, watching a group of cloaked individuals kneel before a glowing statue in the misty courtyard, as cold silence settles over the gathering. A hooded assassin stands behind the man with brown hair, his hand resting on the man's shoulder while the other assassins watch silently, creating a tense and threatening atmosphere. The hooded man grits his teeth and narrows his eyes in frustration, while a single bead of sweat rolls down his cheek as he demands to know what the intruder wants. The hooded figure stands over the kneeling man in blue, who bows his head with a sharp intake of breath as rain falls around them. A boy with tied hands points a finger into the mist and shouts that his master now dwells in this body, his voice echoing through the cold air. The boy stares in shock with wide eyes and an open mouth, his hands gripping his collar as confusion flashes across his face. The 2 hooded figures stand motionless in the dim purple light, their masked faces frozen in confusion as a large question mark hovers between them. Grand arched doors stand in a stone wall under the sunset sky. The boy with wide, glowing eyes stares forward in shock and fear, as the text behind him declares that he is the sacred embodiment of Elam's uncontrollable wrath, his face pale with horror at the revelation. A figure in dark armor stomps down between 3 robed men, sending ice shards scattering across the ground while they watch with stoic expressions as frost spreads beneath their feet. The robed man points his finger forward with a sharp command, as the cold blue mist swirls around the ancient ruins behind him. A man with light brown hair and a dark vest grabs the hooded face of his opponent and demands to know if he has lost his mind, while a sound effect echoes from the impact. The man's eyes narrow into sharp blue slits and his mouth opens in a silent scream, while speed lines streak around him to emphasize the violent intensity of the moment. Two hooded figures stand under a dark, spiky object while exchanging wary glances and whispering that they should leave immediately, their tension rising in the cold air. The 12 gods stand in a celestial circle beneath a starry sky as the horned figure declares that there are 12 gods in the godforsaken world, his tone heavy with revelation. Blue clouds drift through the sky as narration explains that meddlesome gods frequently interfere in worldly affairs, resulting in regular divine incidents and players mistaking Elam for a poorly named god. The horned deity stands amid crackling purple energy, his arms spread wide and eyes narrowed in smug satisfaction as he declares that a god of vengeance thrives on war, conflict, strife, and chaos. A man opens his mouth wide in a silent scream, his jaw stretching unnaturally as he strains against the invisible pressure around him. A hooded figure with blue eyes stares intensely forward while clutching their throat, as a sharp intake of breath escapes them in the dimly lit environment. The boy with reddish-brown hair stares in shock as a hand grabs his wrist, while demanding that last week the other party offered a golden statue to his altar, his eyes wide and red with sudden fear. The man's intense blue eyes narrow in a focused glare, his expression locked in cold determination. A man in a vest points accusingly at two cloaked figures and demands they leave, his voice trembling with fear as the air grows thick with tension. A small figure in a blue suit struggles against unseen restraints while shouting that he wants to be released this instant, as his body trembles with panic and desperation. A man with brown hair stands between two hooded figures in a tense standoff, while the figure on the left speaks with an empty speech bubble and the one on the right stares intensely, creating a heavy atmosphere of confrontation. A character stares forward with an intense, unblinking gaze as their red eye reflects a sharp point of light, creating a moment of piercing focus and sudden realization. Bamilo Dimark stands beneath a glowing blue information plaque that identifies him as the High Archpriest of the Elam High Church, his expression stern and cold. A figure falls upside down through a blue vortex while the hooded man below declares that Lord Elam must forgive him for failing to recognize you, his expression hard with fear. A character grabs the man's tie and demands he stop moving, while the man freezes in shock. A heavyset man with brown hair in a dark vest and white cravat stands with both arms outstretched and fingers pointing forward, his face twisted in shock as he cries out that something is wrong. A man stands frozen in terror before a massive stone monster, while the ground cracks and trembles around him as he pleads for forgiveness. The robed man sits in the misty ruins and demands that the blonde man reveal his true intentions, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. The hooded man grits his teeth and narrows his eyes in anger, while demanding that they stop what they are doing now, his face twisted with frustration. Kale stares with glowing red eyes at the retreating hooded figure, his expression hardening as he demands answers from the shadowy presence. A hooded figure leans forward to confront a startled young man, demanding that he listen closely as the air thickens with tension. The man in the dark hood stares forward with narrowed eyes and a tense jaw, his expression hardening as he demands that no one stand between them, while the air thickens with unspoken threat. Kale's eyes widen and his jaw drops as he gasps in shock, while the air around him vibrates with sudden tension. Kale narrows his blue eyes into a sharp, dangerous glare that pierces through the shadows, his expression radiating cold fury and unyielding resolve. The figure in the dark hood stands with their back to the viewer as a radiant golden light bursts from behind them, illuminating ornate wing-like patterns and casting long shadows across the stone floor. The man in the vest raises his hand in a casual wave while declaring that the third prince will not return to the imperial palace, his expression calm and confident despite the heavy armor before him. A hooded man in dark armor stands with a furrowed brow and demands to know what is happening, his voice sharp against the misty stone courtyard. A man with a scarred face screams in anguish, his eyes wide and bloodshot, while sweat beads on his temple as he yells that the pain is unbearable, the atmosphere thick with raw agony. A sprawling mountain village nestles beneath towering cliffs, while an unseen narrator reflects that the enemy territory of the Empire offers safety despite its danger. The boy smiles broadly and declares that the more you know, the more you can gain, his eyes hidden beneath a shadowed brow as confidence radiates from his expression. A man stands atop a stone platform overlooking three kneeling figures in cloaks and demands that they move immediately, as smoke drifts through the ancient ruins. A character's mouth curves into a sinister smile, while jagged red lines vibrate against the skin as tension crackles through the air. A bonfire crackles and burns brightly in a clearing surrounded by trees, while glowing embers rise into the dark night sky above. A skewer of meat and vegetables floats in midair against a blurred forest background, while an unseen character demands they be eaten immediately, the air heavy with hunger. A pair of hands grasps a bottle, a skewered meat stick, and a whole fish against a stormy sky backdrop, the items gripped tightly as if preparing for a meal. The character stares with wide red eyes at the skewers of meat and fish, his expression twisted in horror as he demands that no one eat this food, sweat dripping down his face while the ominous aroma lingers. A hooded figure stands before the robed group and demands that they act now or face Lord Elam, as his companions watch with glowing golden eyes. The characters' eyes widen with sparkling highlights and blush marks appear on their cheeks as they gasp, their expression filled with overwhelming awe and sudden infatuation. The character stands with a trickle of blood running from their lip, while sweat beads on their cheek and sparkles float in the air around them. The hooded figure laughs and flashes a mischievous grin while holding out a loaf of bread, as the man beside him bristles with frustration. The leader shouts that the target is in front of them while his two masked subordinates stare forward with wide, alert eyes. The hooded man with glowing blue eyes stares forward with a grim expression, his jaw set in determination as he demands that the enemy prepare for battle, shadows swirling ominously around him. A figure in dark robes stands over a smiling young man with orange hair, as the towering presence looms down with an imposing air of authority. A hand grips the crusty bread tightly, while a voice demands that they share their food with everyone else, as the forest air feels suddenly heavy with accusation. The man with light brown hair stares forward with a sharp, intense gaze while the hooded figure stands silently before him, as if a tense confrontation hangs heavy in the forest air. A hand reaches toward the bonfire in the forest clearing as a single bone ignites and floats upward, crackling with sudden magical energy. The boy stands with a frown and red eyes, then transforms into a zombie-like figure with sunken eyes and an open mouth as he shifts from anger to shock. The man with light hair sits by the fire and speaks of his past as an assassin raised in the church, while his hooded companion listens intently with a serious expression. The hooded man with blue eyes narrows his gaze in intense scrutiny, while gritting his teeth against the pressure of a silent confrontation. The man with reddish-brown hair and red eyes stares forward with a confident smirk, his expression sharp and self-assured as he prepares to speak. A round character in a blue suit crouches on the ground and digs into the dirt with both hands, as if searching for something buried beneath. A man with light hair watches from behind as three hooded figures walk into a misty forest, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the trees. A man in a blue suit bends forward with his mouth open and red eyes wide, gasping as steam rises from his body while sweat drips down his arm, the air thick with tension. A man with light brown hair and red eyes stares forward in shock, his mouth agape and sweat beading on his face as he processes a terrifying realization. A man with reddish-brown hair stands bound by a thick rope around his wrists, his eyes glowing red as he stares forward with a tense expression. A masked man with red eyes voices concern that the situation is serious and they will be in danger at this rate, while another figure stands behind him stating Lord Elam gave them instructions. The character grimaces in pain as a sharp object pierces their skin, while crying out that the injury burns fiercely, sweat dripping from their face. The man slams his fist into the ground with a sharp crack, sending dirt and debris flying outward as he grunts in pain from the impact. Two hooded figures exchange a stunned look, their faces marked by shock and sweat as they process the sudden realization between them. The man in the blue suit bends forward at the waist with his back to the viewer, while his body trembles visibly against a hazy forest backdrop as if he braces himself for impact. The man in the suit narrows his glowing red eyes and barks a command with fury, while his tie tightens against his throat under the weight of his rage. The hooded man stares forward with narrowed blue eyes and a furrowed brow, his expression hardening into cold resolve as the wind tugs at his cloak. A man in a dark vest stands with his back to the camera, watching a hooded figure walk away down a misty forest path as blue system text floats above explaining non-critical damage recovery rules and cooldowns. The character's eye widens in shock and pain as dark blood streaks down their face, while sweat drips heavily from their brow. The man grips the tree trunk with both hands and grits his teeth as he braces against the sudden impact, his face contorted in pain, while a large stylized sound effect emphasizes the force of the blow. A man with reddish-brown hair in a gray vest and white shirt collapses forward onto the ground, spitting blood as he hits the dirt, his body convulsing from a violent impact. A man grits his teeth and winces as blood trickles down his face, while a loud cry erupts around him in the tense air. The masked men stand in a red mist, their expressions grim as they face an unseen threat, the air thick with tension. A blue system screen announces that harsh training has improved stamina to level 37, glowing with digital particles against a gradient background. A young man with orange hair and red eyes stands motionless in a forest, his expression cold and unyielding as he stares forward without speaking. Two figures crouch beside a crackling campfire, one declaring their intent to use something to return to Oryx, the firelight casting long shadows across the stone ground. A man's lower face and neck are shown in close-up as he speaks with a slight smirk, his lips parted mid-sentence against a blurred forest backdrop. A hooded man with blue eyes narrows his gaze sharply, his expression hardening into cold suspicion as he scrutinizes something off-frame, the shadow across his face deepening the tension. The young man with red eyes and light brown hair stares intently forward, his expression cold and unyielding, as shadows fall across his brow under a clear blue sky. A man's eyes widen in shock as his brow furrows deeply, conveying sudden alarm or realization against a dark red backdrop. A hooded man crouches low with fists clenched and eyes narrowed in tension, as he demands to know who dares approach him now, the forest behind him still and shadowed. A gloved hand taps a metallic arm guard with an index finger, producing a sharp tapping sound against the dark surface. The hooded man stares forward with a grimace of frustration, his mouth open as he complains that the situation is becoming too troublesome, while sweat beads form on his brow against the blurred forest backdrop. A young man with red eyes and light brown hair stands rigid in a forested twilight, his expression frozen in shock as he demands to know what just happened, the air thick with sudden tension. A masked figure grits his teeth in pain as he whispers that it hurts, with glowing blue symbols pulsing across the black fabric covering his face. A hooded man stands rigid in the forest clearing, his face twisted in grim resolve as he confronts another figure, while a jagged black aura erupts above his head, signaling imminent danger. A character's mouth hangs open in mid-speech, framed by shadowed chin and jawline, as they demand to know who dares interrupt them, their voice trembling with suppressed rage. A character's eyes widen in shock, pupils contracting sharply as they stare forward with trembling intensity, while demanding to know what just happened, their expression frozen in disbelief. A bearded man stands behind a young couple with his hands on their shoulders, while someone off-panel asks if his daughter just got married, the air thick with unspoken tension and social scrutiny. A man with dark hair and a blue eye stares forward in profile, his brow furrowed and mouth slightly open as if speaking or reacting to something unseen, against a backdrop of sky and stone. A blond man sits on a stone ledge with one hand on his hip and the other resting on his knee, facing a hooded figure kneeling before him, while speaking with an expression of mild surprise or inquiry, surrounded by dim forest shadows. The character's lips part slightly in a sharp, silent gasp as red sound effects ripple beside them, their expression frozen mid-reaction against a shadowed backdrop. A young man with red eyes and a sharp smile stares forward intently, his expression radiating confident menace as he declares that the game has only just begun, the forest behind him blurred into shadowy silence. A hooded man stands in a forest with a weary expression on his face, the sunlight filtering through the trees behind him. Two figures sit across from each other by a crackling campfire in the forest, one exclaiming that the third prince's hidden insight is unbelievable and nothing like his public reputation, while smoke curls upward into the twilight air. A young man with red eyes and light brown hair offers a faint, knowing smile while gazing slightly off to the side, his expression calm against a backdrop of blurred green trees. The character's red eye widens in sudden shock, their eyebrow twitching upward as an exclamation mark flashes beside them, signaling immediate alarm or realization. Marquis Elronroyd grips his sword with both hands and stares forward in sudden realization, as he demands to wait a minute, his expression sharp against the stormy sky. The hooded figure strokes his chin in thought as he speaks, while the blond man listens intently from the side. The masked man stares forward with red eyes glowing in shadow, his hand raised to his chin as he demands what happens next, the air thick with silent anticipation. The hooded man with a goatee stares forward with narrowed eyes and a tense expression, while demanding that they just proceed. A figure in dark armor stands motionless on the road, while a man in blue crouches nearby with fire at his feet, shouting that he does not understand why they are here, as the massive boots of an approaching giant loom over the scene. The hooded figure stands beside a wooden post with a speech bubble above him, his expression unreadable as he waits for a response in the dim forest light. The hooded figure stands over the kneeling man in the dark forest, while demanding that he reveal his true intentions, as a heavy silence settles between them under the moonlight. The masked man in the hooded cloak stares with wide blue eyes and an open mouth, demanding to know if he should tear it open for you while a sound effect crackles around his face. The character grips the sword hilt tightly and draws the blade from its scabbard, sparks flying as steel meets metal, while a sharp sound echoes through the air. A cloaked figure with blue hair stands in the rain gripping a sword, his face hidden beneath a hood as he demands that his patience isn't very long. The man with reddish-brown hair and dark sunglasses tilts his head back slightly, a smirk playing on his lips as he lets out a short laugh, the forest background blurred behind him. The man with orange hair turns his head in profile and speaks, his red eye fixed forward with sharp intensity as a faint light glows behind him. The character grits his teeth in pain and frustration while shouting that he cannot believe this bastard, his eyes wide with shock. A man in a vest and shirt bends forward at the waist as if in pain, his body trembling with visible vibration lines against a misty forest backdrop. The character speaks with a determined expression, her lips forming words as she looks forward into the forested background. A hooded figure with a dark mask stares forward with narrowed eyes and a bead of sweat on his cheek, while speaking in reported speech about the danger he perceives, his expression tight with tension. The masked man in the hood snarls while grabbing the brown-haired man by the collar and shoving him against a wall, as the victim gasps that look at this, with his eyes wide in shock. A hooded figure in dark armor stands over a kneeling companion while a blond man watches with wide eyes, as the armored figure demands answers about their mission, tension crackling through the forest air. The hooded man with the scarred face glares forward while the white-haired man beside him looks down with a sharp expression, as tension crackles in the air between them. A hooded figure introduces the masked man standing behind him as Urgel to the third prince, his voice steady and formal against the dark night air. The character stares with intense red eyes fixed forward, their gaze sharp and unblinking as the moment hangs heavy with sudden realization. 4 distinct heraldic emblems hover in a vertical formation above a glowing circular sigil, the central portrait marked by darkened eyes surrounded by intricate magical patterns in faint starlight. The hooded figure stares forward with narrowed blue eyes and a slight smirk, while demanding to know who dares interrupt his rest, the air heavy with silent threat. The armored knight stands with a sword in hand while the red-haired woman smiles and rests her hand on her chest, their expressions calm amidst soft glowing light. A campfire burns brightly in a clearing, while an unseen speaker demands the third prince reveal why they must wait for others. A blond man stands with his back to the camera while 2 hooded figures confront him, one of them demanding answers through an empty speech bubble, tension thick in the misty air. The character maintains a subtle smirk as their mouth curves into a faint smile, while the empty speech bubble above implies an unspoken thought or quiet confidence. A man in a blue vest stares at 2 cloaked figures and demands that they answer him, his face twisted with urgency as the question hangs heavy in the tense air. The man with the eye patch demands to be taken along with the other man, while floating question marks surround them and both characters look confused. The hooded man stares forward with narrowed eyes and a furrowed brow, his expression hardening as he demands answers about the missing heir. The boy tilts his head upward and gazes at the sky with wide eyes, while asking if that is truly possible, as a shadow falls across half of his face. A hooded figure with blue eyes and a dark mask stands still in the mist, sweat dripping from his temple, as he stares forward with intense focus. The man with red eyes stares forward with an intense expression, his face partially shadowed against a crimson background as he demands that the situation be resolved immediately, the air thick with tension. A blond knight in heavy armor charges forward with a drawn sword, while blood sprays around him and soldiers fly backward from the explosion, as an unseen voice states that he is a monster counted on across the entire continent amidst the chaos of battle. The man with brown hair stands facing 2 hooded figures, as the figure on the right demands something in a serious tone, his masked face tense with urgency. The hooded figure with blue eyes stares forward, as he says that then as you said going forward, his expression remains cold and unreadable. A blond man stands with his back to the camera facing 2 cloaked figures in a misty forest, while the tallest figure grips a sword at their side. The man with the glowing blue eye narrows his gaze in a scowl while demanding that they leave immediately, his voice heavy with warning. The hooded figure with blue eyes stares down the brown-haired person while demanding an explanation, as the tension between them thickens in the quiet forest air. The young man stares forward with glowing red eyes and a sharp expression, while declaring that the world is about to change forever, his voice echoing with chilling certainty. The blond man gestures toward the hooded figure with a sharp motion, as if demanding an explanation or issuing a warning, while silence hangs heavy between them in the misty forest. The hooded man narrows his blue eyes in a cold, calculating glare, while demanding that the intruder reveal their true purpose, his voice sharp with warning. A hand grips another's fingers with sharp pressure, while a sudden sound of impact rings out between them. The hooded man glares at the younger figure with a scowl, while demanding to know why he was summoned. The man adjusts his tie with a confident smirk, while declaring that he is ready for the challenge ahead, his expression radiating unshakable self-assurance. The character's lips part into a sharp, angular smile as cold air presses against the side of their face, the tension in their jaw hinting at suppressed emotion or calculation. A knight kneels on the ground with his sword planted before him, while a caption states that he was once a high-ranking knight of the Empire's Holy Order, his armor gleaming under the bright light. The older man and the younger knight stand back-to-back in solemn alignment, their profiles sharp against the glowing emblem above them as silence settles between them with heavy resolve. The hooded man with the face mask stares forward in sudden shock, his mouth open in a gasp as an exclamation mark flashes beside his head. The masked figure in the brown hood stares forward with a cold, unyielding expression as the older man beside him watches intently, while a faint sound of wind rustles through the trees behind them. The masked man stares forward with intense blue eyes, his expression hardening into cold resolve as he demands the truth of what lies ahead, the air thick with unspoken tension. A massive explosion erupts on the mountainside and sends debris flying into the sky, as a brilliant light streaks across the blue horizon. The armored knight stands before the towering swords with a look of shock as he calls out to his highness, while the fiery background crackles with tension. The armored knight and the red-haired mage stand back-to-back as they ready their weapons against the encroaching hooded assassins, while the towering figure in the foreground grips a massive blade, his presence looming over the tense standoff. A blond knight in dark armor grips a massive sword with both hands and shouts that no one dares kidnap the prince, while flames erupt behind him and a red-haired woman watches from the shadows. 2 hooded figures with red eyes and masks stand beneath a swirling vortex of dark energy, their expressions tense as the ominous atmosphere surrounds them. The figure sprints forward with blurred speed, kicking up dust on the road while shouting that he is coming. The man grits his teeth in pain, while sweat beads on his temple as he gasps that the pressure is unbearable, his body trembling under the strain. High-heeled boots step onto a glowing golden sigil on the floor, causing magical runes to flare and emit a sharp ringing sound as power surges beneath her feet. A red-haired woman wreathed in fire raises her staff and demands where Gilrushan has been taken, while flames erupt around her as the ground shakes from her magical outburst. A hooded figure with a pale face turns toward the second cloaked man, as flames roar behind them in the dimming light. Two figures with golden eyes glare intensely at each other, their expressions locked in a tense standoff as the air crackles with unspoken hostility. The hooded figure thrusts his palm forward and unleashes a massive burst of fire that engulfs the battlefield, as he demands an immediate surrender from the defenders below. The blonde man lunges forward with his fist drawn and roars in fury, while two hooded figures stand ready to intercept him against a backdrop of swirling wind. A red-haired figure raises a glowing mechanical device overhead, while two armored guards stand ready with weapons, as masked figures emerge from the mist behind them. The young nobleman stands with glowing red eyes and a trembling jaw, while two shadowed figures flank him on either side, their presence casting a heavy silence over the moment. The armored knight stares forward with narrowed eyes while the red-haired woman tilts her head in confusion, as a large question mark floats between them against a soft pink background. The man with reddish-brown hair stares forward with a manic smile, sweat dripping down his flushed face as he demands that the situation is finally over, his red eyes burning with delirious intensity. The armored man trembles violently with shock as he shouts that what on earth is happening, his eyes wide with disbelief. The masked man with red hair stares forward with a cold, determined expression, while the hooded figure beside him watches silently as tension thickens between them. The hooded figure stands in the foreground, while a man in a vest turns toward two approaching figures against a burning backdrop, his hand raised as if to command them. A blonde knight stands in profile with a calm expression, while a red-haired woman behind him looks on with visible concern as petals drift through the air around them. The orange-haired man spreads his hands wide in a gesture of helplessness or explanation, while saying that he has no idea what is going on, his expression caught between confusion and mild frustration against the plain purple background. A blonde man stares forward with a bead of sweat on his cheek and utters a confused sound, while behind him, a red-haired figure glows with purple energy against a backdrop of fire and smoke. A character grits their teeth in visible strain, lips pulled back and jaw clenched tight, as if suppressing a scream or enduring pain, with tension radiating from the facial muscles. The red-haired woman snarls with bared teeth and flaring aura, demanding that the other person just shut it and stay still, her expression twisted in furious command as dark energy crackles around her. A red-haired woman with glowing eyes raises a staff toward a sweating man while demanding if this is how she taught him to behave, her expression twisted in fury against a backdrop of roaring flames. Turvan Sui stands amid swirling purple magic, holding her ornate staff with a smirk, while rumors describe her as an ancient witch who bathes in virgin's blood, casting an aura of sinister legend around her. Two silhouetted witches perform a ritual as glowing energy swirls around them, while narration explains that they pass down magic, memories, and appearance through inheritance to preserve fear and mystique. A gloved hand grips a shoulder tightly, causing tension in the fabric, as an unseen character demands silence with a sharp exclamation, while sunlight flares behind them. The blonde knight in silver armor rests his gauntleted hand on the red-haired mage's shoulder while holding a glowing staff, as she glances upward with flushed cheeks and parted lips, bathed in soft radiant light that hints at intimacy or tension between them. A red-haired woman stares with flushed cheeks at a man in armor, while behind her a brown-haired boy clenches his jaw and fist as if suppressing rage or fear. A red-haired man in a formal vest stands with arms crossed and flanked by two hooded figures, glaring forward with stern resolve as he declares that they will take them to Abrax, the air thick with tension. A blonde knight with blue eyes shouts furiously while a red-haired woman beside him looks on with calm concern, their faces framed against a dusky sky tinged with distant firelight. A young man with light brown hair stands facing two hooded figures in a misty forest, his expression somber as he admits that he knows everything and expects them to find him pathetic, the air thick with tension and unspoken judgment. A character with blonde hair and wide blue eyes stares forward in stunned silence, their pupils constricted as if witnessing something impossible. A young man with brown hair and a red-pupiled eye stares intently into the distance, his face half-shadowed by dramatic lighting, as he silently observes something off-frame with unwavering focus. A red-haired warrior and armored knight stand ready with weapons drawn as flames erupt beside them, while a blonde youth turns toward shadowed figures near a tree, demanding to know who they are under the dim twilight sky. The red-haired woman stands rigidly holding her ornate staff while the blonde man gestures with both hands in frustration, as he demands to know why she was avoiding his teachings all this time, under a pale blue sky streaked with falling embers. A red-haired woman in a blue dress stands rigid with shock as flames roar behind her, while a speech bubble above declares that the situation is dire, her expression frozen in dread. A young man with red eyes and styled orange hair stands motionless in formal attire, his expression unreadable yet intense as the dark night sky looms behind him. A man with reddish-brown hair in a vest stands calmly with one hand in his pocket, observing the massive armored leg beside him as embers float through the air. A woman's profile leans forward with a faint, knowing smile as her lips part in a soft exhale, the warm glow of sunset illuminating her features and casting long shadows across her face. The man in the vest raises his hand and demands to know what is coming next, his red eyes glowing with an ominous intensity as the sky darkens behind him. A woman with long red hair and a stern expression holds a golden staff as she stands in front of a fiery background, her eyes fixed ahead. A woman with long red hair stands in profile against a twilight sky, her lips curving into a faint smile as she speaks without sound, the fading light casting a soft glow on her features. Kale stares with intense red eyes and a sharp expression, his gaze piercing through the air as if locked on a distant threat, the golden sunset behind him casting a dramatic glow over his determined face. The red-haired mage stands amidst the flames, holding her staff aloft as she demands that they recognize her as the master of the five-colored tower. The woman with crimson hair grips her ornate staff and stares upward at the looming figure, while flames flicker behind her and sparks drift through the air. The armored man stands firm amidst rising flames and sparks, his expression unyielding as he declares that nothing matters. A blond man grits his teeth as a single tear streams down his flushed cheek, while an exclamation mark flashes beside him against the backdrop of roaring flames. The armored knight kneels on one knee with his sword planted in the ground, shouting that he fights for a great cause while flames erupt around him. The man in the vest smiles and raises his hand as a blue magical barrier forms around the kneeling knight, while the red-haired woman watches with shock and confusion. A blonde-haired man in armor weeps profusely with eyes shut and teeth gritted as blue holographic text announces that Turvan Sway has joined the party, while tears stream down his face against a backdrop of burning embers. The armored knight with a blue scarf stares forward with intense, narrowed eyes and furrowed brows, his expression hardening into cold determination as the shadow of a structure falls across his face. A man with brown hair watches from the foreground as a knight in blue armor stands at a table under a gazebo, his posture rigid and silent. The armored man stands with his back turned as the blindfolded boy clasps his hands in a plea, while demanding that the guards be sent away to let them speak privately. A man clenches his jaw and grits his teeth in frustration, while bearing them in a tense snarl that signals suppressed anger. A maid sits in a wooden chair holding a swaddled infant while addressing the person standing before her, announcing that the prince has been successfully delivered after much effort. The blonde guard holds the screaming prince in a tight embrace as he demands that the kidnapper dare to take the third prince away from his duty, his expression grim and unwavering. A fist clenches tightly in the foreground as a young man stands with his hands clasped, waiting for what comes next. The blonde man grits his teeth in a scowl of anger, while demanding that he is safe within this place as a dark aura swirls around him. Kale's blue eyes widen in shock as he gasps out a sharp cry, his face contorted with sudden horror. The man turns his head away with a sharp expression, while declaring that even though the person is a 7-star, his voice filled with frustration and disbelief. The man's lips curl into a sharp, sinister smile as shadows deepen around his face, while a low growl escapes him that promises impending danger. A man in blue and white robes stands before a large armored figure with a speech bubble above his head, while the background blurs into an indistinct outdoor setting. The armored man gestures with his open hand and demands that the situation be resolved immediately, his brow furrowed in frustration against the cool blue background. A cloaked figure stands amidst the rain and glowing pink energy while shouting that yes, his silhouette stark against the dark, stormy background. A figure in dark armor stands motionless within a grand stone hall as purple energy ripples across the floor, casting jagged shadows against the columns and creating an atmosphere of sudden, supernatural disruption. The man with blonde hair stands in profile under a crimson glow, his expression grim and unyielding as the tension thickens around him. The man stares forward with intense red eyes, his expression hardening as he demands answers in a voice that cuts through the air like steel. The armored knight taps the man on the shoulder and demands what he thinks so deeply about and what is with that sword, as the man jumps in surprise. The blonde knight kneels before the seated nobleman with orange hair and a sword planted in the earth between them, while demanding an answer that hangs heavy in the forest air. The boy stares forward with wide red eyes and a tense expression, his face partially shadowed as he demands to know what is happening outside the room. The young man stares forward with wide red eyes and a furrowed brow, his expression frozen in confusion as he mutters that he does not understand. The man stands with a furrowed brow and piercing blue eyes, his face half in shadow as he demands answers from the darkness ahead. Kale stands in full plate armor and stares at the approaching figure with a calm, unyielding expression, as he demands that they reveal their purpose for being here. Karsloit stands in full armor with a sword at his side, as the narrator describes him as a solid tanker worthy of the title Knight of Dawn, while recounting that he used to bring the night everywhere if raised properly. The blonde man laughs aloud and declares that so he is, as the red-haired woman gasps in shock beside him, her hand pressed to her chest. The red-haired woman stretches her arms wide in the morning air and asks if Gilrushan slept well, her voice carrying a cheerful tone through the quiet forest. The knight in silver armor stands before the red-haired woman with a smile, while she exclaims that yes, her eyes filled with affection. The woman tilts her head and smiles softly with a knowing glint in her eyes, as if she has just heard something that amuses or satisfies her. A blonde knight in silver armor stands with a calm expression as the wind rustles through the trees, and a red-haired figure walks away into the forest, while he demands that they leave the matter behind. The boy with the red eye stares forward in profile, his expression hard and unreadable against a backdrop of blurred forest light. A figure clad in armor grips their own shoulder with a gloved hand, while the sound of fabric tearing echoes through the forest air. The armored man stands with his head lowered as he states that magic had not been treated like an essential skill for everyone, while the man in the vest looks on with a serious expression. The man stares forward with intense red eyes, his expression hardening into cold resolve as the air around him shimmers with suppressed power. The man stares forward with a cold, hardened expression as memories of abandonment flood his mind, while people vanish around him in the dimly lit hall. The man's lips part in a sharp exhale as cold air escapes, while his eyes remain closed and his expression remains unreadable. The man stares forward with intense blue eyes and a furrowed brow, his expression hardening into cold determination as the shadows deepen around him. The blonde man tilts his head back to look upward, his blue eyes narrowing with a sharp, focused intensity as the sky stretches behind him. The blonde man tilts his head slightly and smiles with a soft, knowing expression, while the air around him shimmers with quiet anticipation. The character smiles with a sharp, knowing expression as a sudden sound cuts through the silence, his lips curling into a dangerous grin. The prince leans over a glowing chest overflowing with gold and jewels, his hands outstretched as he declares that he is more confident than anyone when it comes to mastering the godforsaken world, while vowing not to leave things like this despite being a trash prince with a trash character. An X-class Archmage card materializes in the sky with radiant light, displaying a robed figure holding a staff as purple and gold beams explode outward from its edges. A man in armor grips the shoulder of a blonde-haired knight, while the knight recoils and gasps as he demands to know why this is happening, his eyes wide with shock. The man tilts his head with a smirk, his red eyes gleaming with amusement as he demands that the answer be given now, the air thick with anticipation. A red-haired woman in a dark dress leaps through the air above two men on a forest path, while one man in armor braces himself against a log and another sits nearby holding a sword. A colossal cockroach emerges from a swarm of smaller insects as blinding light pierces the gloom, its massive form casting long shadows across the battlefield. The armored knight and the red-haired woman sit on a log facing the blonde man in civilian clothes, who sits apart on another log holding his sword between his knees as silence stretches through the forest clearing. The blonde character stares with wide blue eyes as a bright starburst flashes near their hair, while demanding to know what is happening, the sudden light creating an atmosphere of urgent surprise. A man with brown hair stands facing two individuals, while a red-haired woman smiles beside him and a blonde knight in armor watches with a stern expression. The blonde knight stares downward with narrowed eyes and a tense expression, his mouth slightly open as if speaking or reacting in shock, while sunlight casts sharp shadows across his armored face against a blurred green background. The character's lips curve into a sharp, confident smirk as they speak with quiet authority, their voice carrying an unspoken threat that hangs heavy in the air. A blonde-haired man with blue eyes smiles slightly in profile against a blurred forest backdrop, his expression calm and confident as he speaks about something unseen but clearly anticipated. A red-haired woman and a blonde knight stand side by side facing an unseen speaker, their expressions calm yet attentive, as they listen to demands being made in a sunlit courtyard. A hand grips the golden hilt of a sword tightly, fingers pressing into the metal as if preparing to draw or strike, while a faint blue glow traces the blade's edge against a blurred forest backdrop. A blonde-haired man in a vest and ruffled shirt sits on a stone ledge holding a longsword upright in his left hand, his expression serious and focused, while sunlight filters through the trees behind him. A red-haired woman and a blonde knight stand side by side in confusion, as a large question mark hovers between them against a soft blue sky. The red-haired woman glares with arms crossed while the blonde knight grips a boy's shoulder in alarm, as she demands why he hasn't come to his senses and insists he just go home, tension thickening the forest air. A man with orange hair and red eyes grimaces in pain as metallic gauntlets violently shake his head from both sides, while dark red anger symbols pulse around him. A blonde man screams in rage with his mouth wide open, his eyes wide and shadowed by fury, as a jagged red aura explodes above his head, the air vibrating with his uncontrolled outburst. A red-haired woman kneels in shallow water with her eyes closed and hair whipping violently around her, clutching a glowing pendant at her throat as if bracing against an unseen force, the air crackling with tension above her. The blonde knight sits rigid in his armor with sweat on his brow, while the red-haired woman kneels beside him with closed eyes, as a dark oppressive aura swirls above them in the forest clearing. The red-haired woman kneels on the ground with a bead of sweat rolling down her cheek and extends one hand in a questioning gesture, while asking what is happening, surrounded by a hazy forest backdrop. A blonde man with red eyes smiles confidently while wearing a formal vest and cravat, standing before a backdrop of green trees under a bright sky. A blonde knight in dark armor stands rigid with his eyes shadowed, while a speech bubble emerges from below him, suggesting he is delivering a statement under heavy tension. Two armored knights face each other with swords drawn in a stone arena, while a robed official stands between them overseeing the duel's setup under bright overhead light. The blonde knight in silver armor stares forward with a tense expression, his brow furrowed and mouth slightly open as if reacting to an unseen threat or command, the soft daylight behind him casting no shadow on his resolve. The brown-haired man points at the red-haired woman while ordering the knight to drop his sword, his expression stern against the backdrop of the forest. The blonde-haired character stares upward with wide, shadowed eyes and parted lips, as if struck by sudden realization or dread, while demanding what just happened in reported speech, their expression tense against a pale background. A blonde-haired character clenches his teeth and narrows his eyes in a tight close-up, radiating intense anger as dark energy swirls around him. A seated character rests their hands on their knees while facing the armored legs of a standing figure, as a speech bubble emerges from below to indicate ongoing dialogue in a sunlit outdoor setting. A blonde knight in silver armor crouches low with clenched fists and narrowed eyes, as he demands to know who dares challenge him here, his breath sharp against the cold stone floor beneath him. The armored knight stands in the forest clearing and extends his gauntleted hand toward the younger man with a stern expression, demanding answers about the situation at hand. The man stares forward with intense blue eyes, his expression hardening into a cold glare as he demands that the intruder leave immediately, the tension in his stance signaling an imminent confrontation. The blonde-haired man leans down and shouts at the younger man below him, while demanding to know what he is thinking, his expression filled with intense frustration. A blonde knight in blue armor stares with shock and disbelief at the man in black before him, his mouth slightly open as if he cannot believe what he sees. A blonde knight in heavy armor stands with his back to the viewer, while an officer in a red cape points and shouts that he wants him there, creating tension as the armored figure remains still. The blonde man with blue eyes narrows his gaze and clenches his jaw in a sharp frown, while his gloved hand grips the edge of his collar, as if demanding an explanation from someone just out of frame. The woman exhales a sharp breath, her lips forming the word exactly with a tone of cold agreement, as the forest wind rustles through the trees behind her. A blonde man in a vest points his finger at an armored figure while speaking, demanding an explanation for the situation. A blonde knight in silver armor stares forward with a blank expression as floating question marks surround his head, while he demands to know what is going on. The boy pinches his cheek and winces in pain, while laughing that they should just leave it alone, the sharp sting of the pinch making him wince. The blonde knight in armor tilts his head with a smirk and demands that the man be allowed to speak, his eyes gleaming with calculated mischief. A red-haired woman stands with her mouth open in shock, her eyes wide as she demands to know what is happening, the forest background blurring into a hazy blur around her. The ogre's red eyes narrow in suspicion, and a bead of sweat rolls down his green cheek as he demands to know what the thief seeks, his fangs bared in warning. The masked figure in the hooded cloak shouts that their prize is way bigger, while the bound goblin sits confused with a question mark above his head. A man's lips part in a sharp exhale as tension ripples across his jawline, the corner of his mouth twitching with suppressed frustration. A hooded figure stands with arms outstretched, holding a monstrous wolf-like creature between them while another robed man watches intently, as the beast's red eyes glow and its claws dig into the air. The hooded figure on the left stands with an open mouth in shock while the masked companion beside him watches silently, their expressions frozen as a voice from off-screen demands they speak up. A robed figure stands with their back to the viewer facing four masked companions in a forest clearing, as one of them speaks through an empty speech bubble. The man with brown hair sits on the wooden floor while three other men lie bound and unconscious around him, his expression grim as he surveys the scene. A masked figure strides through the sunlit doorway, his shadow stretching across the floor as captives watch him with tense stillness. The hooded man stands with a stern expression as bright light flares behind him, his eyes narrowed in determination. A figure on the tree branch declares that they have caught enough and preparations should be complete, as shadowy figures stand motionless along the path below. A masked man in a brown hood raises his hand and shouts that he will go, while another crouching figure pleads that he is closest with Sir Gilrushan and begs to be allowed to leave, the tension thick as they argue over who must act. The man narrows his eyes and forces a sharp grin across his face, as the white text on his forehead vibrates with suppressed energy, creating an atmosphere of contained rage. A beast with glowing red eyes roars in the foreground, while a hooded figure with white hair and blue eyes stares forward with a cold, unblinking expression. A figure in a brown hood and dark mask stares forward with intense blue eyes, as empty speech bubbles hover above and below the frame. A hooded figure glares at the distant group while demanding that they let the prisoner go, as the high priest shouts back that cooperation with their plan is required first, tension thick in the air. The man in the vest holds a curved blade at his side while facing the armored knight, as the red-haired woman watches from behind them. The woman tilts her head and stares forward with a sharp, knowing expression, her lips slightly parted as if she has just heard something unexpected, the forest behind her blurred in soft focus. The boy with orange hair smiles broadly in profile, his red eyes sharp and focused against the soft green blur of the forest behind him. The armored man stands with a stern expression while the red-haired woman looks up in confusion, as a large question mark hovers between them to emphasize their shared uncertainty. The young man with reddish-brown hair stares forward with glowing red eyes and a sharp, predatory smile, his expression radiating an unsettling intensity that suggests he is about to deliver a chilling remark. The damp goblin village stands shrouded in mist under the towering tree, while a warning notes that seasoned goblins inhabit this hunting ground, not recommended for beginners. 3 armored figures walk in unison through the sun-dappled forest, their boots striking the dirt path as they move forward with purpose. The blonde man in the vest stares forward with a confident smirk as the red-haired woman behind him looks on in shock, while he demands that they listen to what he has to say, his voice steady and commanding. The knight stands in the forest with a calm expression and speaks without showing emotion, his blue eyes fixed on something unseen. The red-haired woman smiles with a predatory glint in her eyes, while demanding to know why the man hesitates before she acts. The blonde man stares in shock at the paralyzed figure behind him, while the red-haired woman observes with a slight smile as he demands to know why his body is seriously paralyzed. A knight stands amid swirling mist and falling debris with his sword resting against the ground, his armor stained with blood and his expression grim as dust settles around him. The red-haired character's eyes widen in shock as her gaze locks with the other person's steady stare, tension crackling between them. The armored man stands with his hands on his hips while the robed woman looks up at him and the sword-wielding man watches them, as a speech bubble hangs empty above their heads in the forest clearing. The blonde man touches his chin with a confident smirk and a bead of sweat on his temple, while the red-haired woman smiles at him, her expression calm and knowing against the blurred forest background. A blonde character with blue eyes looks forward with an open mouth, as if calling out in a forest setting. The glowing blue interface displays the text Vanguard Swordsmanship as a composite skill of S-Class, describing it as a secret technique of the Roit family that pursues principles of cleaving swordsmanship using a two-handed sword. The character grips a sword hilt as blue energy surges around their hand and blade, while demanding that the weapon awaken to its true power, the air crackling with raw magical intensity. A blue screen displays text stating that equipping the Roit family sword Howlblade increases damage by 20%. A figure clad in dark armor swings a glowing sword with blinding speed, sending blue energy surging through the air as he shouts that no one will escape his blade. A warrior in dark armor descends through a forest canopy with a sword trailing blue lightning, as the narration identifies this display as the skill that elevated Elrond Roit to 9-star rank and synergizes perfectly with his Howlblade. A woman with red hair stands beside an armored man in a forest clearing, her lips curling into a confident smile as she looks toward the figure in the foreground. A knight in dark armor stares forward with piercing eyes, his jaw set as he demands that the enemy surrender immediately, the forest behind him trembling under the weight of his presence. The blonde man screams with his mouth wide open and eyes wide, while shouting that it is impossible, his face contorted in absolute shock. A man with blonde hair stares forward with a shocked expression as purple wavy lines fill the background, his mouth opening in a silent gasp while an unseen figure looms in the foreground. The character stares forward with narrowed eyes, their gaze sharp and unyielding as the light catches the edge of their face. The red-haired woman gasps in shock as the armored knight beside her stiffens, his eyes narrowing with sudden alarm. The blonde nobleman stands between the armored knight and the red-haired woman, his crimson eyes fixed on the knight with a subtle smirk as he demands an explanation for their presence in his territory, while the tension in the air thickens under the weight of his silent challenge. A hooded figure stands silently among the trees, while a man in the foreground stares at them with intense focus. The cloaked figure with blue eyes stares forward in silence, while demanding that no one interrupts the coming battle. 3 armored figures stand in a line facing a hooded stranger in the forest, their postures tense and guarded as they confront the unknown traveler without speaking. The masked figure leans down toward the orange-haired youth and demands to know his identity, while the youth stares back with a tense expression. A character smiles with a sharp, predatory expression as they speak in reported speech, their eyes gleaming with hidden intent. The system displays the item details for Elixir of Strength, stating that this consumable greatly enhances the user's strength for a short time. A massive eyeball floats suspended in swirling purple energy, its red iris dilated and cracked surface pulsing with violent magical force. A masked figure with piercing blue eyes stares forward with intense focus, while the sound of wind whistles past his ear. A figure in a brown hooded cloak stands motionless before the blond man, his white hair and dark eyes visible beneath the fabric, as the air grows heavy with silent tension. The beast's red eyes widen in shock and a bead of sweat rolls down its cheek as it trembles before the sudden threat. A man with golden hair and red eyes stares forward with a cold, intense gaze, a single bead of sweat tracing his cheek as the forest behind him remains silent and still. A man with orange hair stands in a forest clearing holding a sword, while facing a goblin that trembles before him as he demands the creature to understand that this reality is unlike any game. A hand grips a sword hilt and draws the blade with a sharp metallic sound, while an orc in the background stares with wide, bloodshot eyes. The screen flashes with bright blue light as the message "You have leveled UP" appears, signaling a system notification. The young man in the suit extends his hand forward as blue lightning crackles around his fingers and he murmurs that this is unexpected. The notification appears on a blue background, announcing that the character has gained 1 skill point, signaling an immediate system reward. The system displays a blue screen with the instruction to open the skill tree and acquire a new skill. The boy's eyes widen into glowing red spirals as his pupils dilate and his gaze locks forward with terrifying intensity, while the air shimmers around him like heat rising from a burning surface. The notification system displays that the user has spent 3 skill points to learn Vagabond martial arts, as the rough fighting style seeps into their body and grants a 1% bonus to strength and stamina. A bound goblin stares upward in terror as a massive rope tightens around his neck, while he demands if there is still a long way to go. Blue notification boxes flash against a dark background as the message that you have leveled up repeats across the screen, accompanied by splashes of black ink and digital glitch effects. A swirling vortex of purple energy ignites within a circular seal, while a star-shaped burst of light pierces the dark magical array above it. A blue system interface announces that 4 skill points are spent to learn extreme training and grants a 1% intelligence bonus, as the character becomes more adept in critical situations. The red-haired woman stands beside the blonde man as she speaks to the figure in the foreground, confirming that her disciple sneaked something good without telling her. A blonde man in armor stands beside a red-haired woman while another man gestures toward them, demanding that he be given some of whatever item is missing from the group. The red-haired woman roars in fury as her eyes glow pink, while the 2 masked figures beside her tense with raised fists, and she screams that he is an ungrateful brat, ill-mannered fool, greedy pig. The man with blonde hair narrows his red eyes into a sinister smile, while a dark shadow falls across his face as he whispers that no one escapes. The hooded man narrows his eyes in sharp suspicion, while demanding where the stolen artifact is hidden. A knight in blue armor raises his arm and shouts for everyone to calm down, while a red-haired woman beside him stands defiant with hands on her hips as the crowd behind them murmurs in tension. Kale's red eyes widen in terror as a shadow falls across his face, while he gasps that something is wrong and sweat drips down his cheek. The knight and the man stand back to back with their swords raised, while the armored figure demands that they protect the entrance against the approaching army, tension thick in the air. A figure slashes through the goblin horde with a massive blade, sending bodies flying in every direction while muttering that 3 or 4 would have been enough. A figure wreathed in roaring flames charges forward with blinding speed, as the ground erupts beneath their feet and a deafening roar shatters the air around them. A red-haired mage stands with arms crossed in a sunlit forest, smoke rising from her staff, as she faces the partially visible boy with glowing red eyes. A green goblin leaps from the sky with a curved blade raised high, while a blond man below braces his sword against the incoming strike as the air shimmers with tension. The man in the vest blocks the goblin's blade with his sword and parries it away, as the impact sends a shockwave through the air. The character with orange hair narrows their red eye into a sharp, focused glare, while the fabric of their dark collar shifts slightly against their skin. The man with orange hair swings his long sword downward in a powerful arc, slicing through the air and striking the green-skinned orc below as sparks fly from the impact. The orange-haired swordsman parries the assassin's strike with his blade and forces the attacker back into a defensive stance, while demanding that no one approaches him. The green-skinned goblin raises his curved blade high above his head, his red eyes locked on the glowing crosshair targeting his chest as blue energy crackles around him. The man in white lunges forward and drives his elbow into the green-clad opponent's torso, sending him reeling backward through the air as he shouts that this is not enough. The man stares forward with glowing red eyes and a sharp smile, while declaring that this is good, his gaze intense and unnerving. Jagged mountain peaks rise against a pale golden sky, their slopes dusted with greenery as the light fades into a quiet evening stillness. A man in a vest leans his forehead against a tree trunk in the forest and closes his eyes, his hand pressed flat against the bark as exhaustion settles over him. The system announces that the taste for pain skill activates, while blue light pulses across the screen. A blue system interface displays the message that mental and physical recovery speed massively increases for 30 seconds, granting a temporary surge of vitality. Heavy clouds gather over the jagged mountain peaks, while thunder rolls across the sky as stormy winds whip through the valleys. A blonde character stares forward with intense blue eyes, his gaze sharp and unblinking, while shadows fall across his face in a tense moment of silent focus. The armored man with blonde hair declares that Order and he are both completely exhausted, while the hooded figures stand behind him in a tense silence. The blonde man stares in shock at the approaching cloaked figures, his eyes wide with fear as they advance silently through the dark air. The man stands with a confident smile and raises his hand to beckon while demanding that they head out, the cool evening air settling around him as he prepares for their departure. A masked figure stands in the foreground while three robed figures raise their fists and hands in unison behind him, as if chanting a collective spell or oath, the air crackling with sudden energy. A campfire crackles with bright orange flames, while Korean onomatopoeia for the sound of burning wood floats above it. A cloaked figure holds a bottle in one hand and gestures with the other, while declaring that they are ready to leave, their expression calm despite the tension. A hooded figure leaps toward the campfire while two robed guards stand ready with weapons, as the man in the foreground watches with a cold, calculating expression under the night sky. The blonde knight in silver armor points forward with a smirk while the man beside him holds a bottle and mutters that someone is lying again, his expression darkening with suspicion. A man with brown hair peeks from behind a tree trunk in the forest, his expression cold and calculating as he observes the surroundings. A man with blonde hair throws his head back and laughs loudly in a sunlit forest, while shouting that he will not stop until he finds the truth, his joy radiating through the trees. A man peeks from behind a tree trunk with narrowed eyes and a bead of sweat on his cheek, as he demands to know who is watching him, the tension thick in the quiet forest. A soldier crouches behind a tree and asks his captain if they should eliminate the approaching group, while another soldier watches with a grim expression in the tense forest. The man with spiky white hair stares forward with narrowed golden eyes and a faint smirk, his expression sharp and commanding as he prepares to speak. The man glares with intense anger and a bead of sweat rolls down his temple, while demanding that someone answer him immediately. The man stares forward with wide, shocked eyes and a bead of sweat on his cheek as he realizes that they lit a fire without any concealment magic, even though no one should have been able to see it. The hooded figure stands silently beside his companion in the misty forest, their faces obscured by shadows as a dark energy swirls around them, creating an atmosphere of looming danger. The armored knight stands between the red-haired woman and the man in the vest as they survey the misty forest, while the air hums with the tension of a recent kidnapping. The man in blue stands still at the wooden doorway while a figure with silver hair looks up in surprise as two distant figures approach through the forest, creating an atmosphere of sudden tension. A man with light brown hair stands in profile near a tree, his expression sharp and focused as he looks off to the side, while wind rustles through the foliage around him. The armored knight and the man in the vest stand behind a wall of magical fire, their faces tightening with shock as they realize the hooded figures before them are not fleeing, but staring back with cold, unblinking eyes. A man in a purple robe stands alone on the right while three cloaked figures and two others watch from the left, as an unseen speaker demands answers about their presence in the forest, the air thick with tension and unspoken accusation. The armored knight stands beside the orange-haired servant with a stern expression, while the servant looks down at his empty hands as tension fills the air between them. A man with brown hair stares forward with narrowed eyes and a tense expression, his lips parting as he speaks in a low voice against the backdrop of a twilight sky. The young man stands with a glowing red halo above his head and another below, his eyes burning red as shadows split his face in half, the air thick with supernatural intensity. The armored man stands with a stern expression and demands that His Highness answer the question himself, while the other figure listens silently against the backdrop of green foliage. A figure in dark leggings and purple heels stands on wooden flooring, their feet planted firmly as a sharp sound effect rings out, signaling the impact of a decisive step or sudden arrival. The armored man stands between his companions with a cold expression as the red-haired woman gasps in shock, her body tensing against an unseen threat while the air grows heavy with tension. The man with reddish-brown hair stares forward with intense red eyes, his expression shifting into a confident smirk as the forest background blurs around him. The man with brown hair narrows his eyes in a cold, determined stare as red energy pulses around him, while he demands that no one stands in his way tonight. A man in a dark vest stands over another man kneeling on the ground, his posture rigid and commanding as he speaks with an air of authority, casting long shadows across the sunlit forest floor. A blond man in a vest stands with hands in pockets and greets Lord Pellet, as two figures walk away toward a distant campfire under the night sky. The boy stares with narrowed red eyes and parted lips, his face half-shadowed as he demands that the answer be given now, tension radiating from his rigid expression. The pink-haired man extends his hand toward the brown-haired man while asking why would he do that, their faces close in a tense forest clearing. A character stares forward with an intense, narrowed eye, while shadows fall across their face and strands of dark hair frame the side. A man with orange hair and a dark vest stands in a misty field and stares down at another figure from behind, his expression calm as he speaks to them, the damp air clinging to the grass around their feet. A man with brown hair stares forward with a furrowed brow and tense expression, his mouth slightly open as if he is about to speak or has just been startled. A character with dark hair leans forward and presses their lips against the other person's neck, as a sharp sound effect erupts from the point of contact, while tension fills the air. A man with dark hair stares forward with narrowed eyes and a slight smirk, while demanding to know if she thinks he would ever kill her. A man with orange hair stands in a forest clearing, hands in his pockets while asking what is wrong, his expression calm and curious. The young man with brown hair stands with a solemn expression as the figure beside him extends an arm forward, his gaze fixed on something beyond the frame. The character stares with intense red eyes and furrowed brows, his gaze fixed forward with unyielding focus. The man with reddish hair places his hand on the shoulder of the man with brown hair, while smiling confidently as he speaks to him. The young man in the vest smiles broadly with his eyes closed, while a speech bubble above him contains the word "no" in stylized lettering, conveying a firm rejection. The dark-haired man leans in close to the light-haired man with a smirk on his face, while the other looks down at him with an unreadable expression and cold eyes. A character smiles broadly and reveals sharp teeth, while demanding that the person who took the treasure return it immediately, his voice dripping with menacing calm. A man with light brown hair stares forward with wide, fearful eyes, and a bead of sweat trickling down his forehead as he demands to know what is happening, the air thick with sudden tension. The man presses a finger to his lips and demands silence, while his eyes widen with an intense, focused gaze. The dark-eyed man leans close to his companion with a sinister smile while the other places a finger to his lips in warning, as an unseen danger looms beneath the starlit sky. A clenched fist grips the edge of a surface tightly, while onomatopoeic symbols appear above to emphasize the tension in the moment. The blond man raises his hand in a farewell gesture to the dark-haired observer, commanding that he return with his subordinates at dawn as the morning mist settles around them. The man stands with a bead of sweat on his cheek and eyes wide in shock, while the light above him intensifies into a blinding halo that fills the background. A lone figure in a white and black uniform stands with their back to the viewer, gazing out at a vast forest under a pale blue sky. A dark, swirling vortex of smoke rises from the wreckage into the sky, while embers drift through the air. A solitary knight stands on a dirt path between dense trees, framed by oversized green leaves in the foreground, while the sky above glows with soft clouds and bright daylight. A man with blonde hair stands in a blue uniform holding a sword by his side, his expression serious and focused as he looks forward. The blue information box displays the details of the comprehensive skill grade B Trafalgar swordsmanship, explaining that this swordplay is passed down by the old Luxon Kingdom's knights and focuses on flowing defense and follow-up techniques usable with any weapon type. The knight's sword stands upright, glowing with intense red and gold energy as flames swirl around it, while the narrator explains that for the Marquis, his weapon is more than just a tool. It is an ego sword with its own will. A man in white armor stands holding a glowing sword while declaring that the roaring sword is a symbol of the Roit family head, his expression serious against a fiery backdrop. The notification confirms that 4 skill points have been used while a glowing orb on the magical diagram activates, as the system announces that the character has learned nomadic crushing swordsmanship. Blue information box displays the text Comprehensive Skill Grade C Nomadic Crushing Swordsmanship, describing it as a sword style filled with the grudge of a nomadic tribe from the western continent that pursues extreme principles of crushing swordplay, while noting its special ability seems to hide a secret. A blue notification screen displays the message that you can now perform basic sword techniques, marking the successful acquisition of new combat abilities. A man in dark armor raises a curved blade above his head while gripping a straight sword at his waist, as ethereal arcs of energy swirl around him against the backdrop of a sunlit forest. The boy holds the sword aloft with a gleeful expression, his eyes sparkling in delight as he demands to see its true power, surrounded by a radiant golden glow that signifies his excitement. A massive blade strikes downward with crushing force, sending out blinding sparks and shockwaves that overwhelm the battlefield as relentless attacks rain down. A flowing sword cuts through the air with soft transitions and creates openings in a burst of light. The diagram displays 3 glowing orbs, gold, green, and purple, linked by blue arrows in a cycle, while an overlay states that in Shinverse, crushing, quick, and flowing swords exist with rock-paper-scissors-like relationships between them. The armored figure grips the sword hilt with a gloved hand and draws the blade upward, the metal gleaming under bright light as tension fills the air. A blue information box displays the text Comprehensive Skill Grade C Nomadic Crushing Swordsmanship, along with a description of the skill's origin and principles, concluding with a note that it seems to hide a secret. The Luxon Kingdom stands as a vassal state of the empire far out in the west, surrounded by clouds and bathed in golden light. A determined monk with spiky hair stares forward with a clenched jaw, while shadowy figures in identical robes stand behind him bound by ropes, the air thick with tension and impending conflict. A massive explosion engulfs the city in flames and smoke, while a voice declares that the United responds to the attack. A row of hooded figures stands in silhouette against a glowing orange sky, their forms rigid and unmoving as they face the viewer. A blonde man in dark armor stands beside a red-haired woman, smiling confidently as he announces the arrival of the Golden Kingdom, his voice echoing with triumph. The blonde warrior stands with his sword drawn and demands they surrender right now, while the distant figures respond that it is grade C now. A blonde man and a brown-haired youth stare down at cloaked figures with intense expressions, as the air crackles with tension between the opposing groups. A lone figure stands at the mouth of a dark cave while three groups gather on the path below, as a heavy blue sound effect vibrates through the air. A man with orange hair yawns loudly, his eyes half closed and sweat beading on his face, while the woman beside him mirrors his action and a blonde knight in armor watches with a tense expression. The man in the center raises his hand to signal silence, while the woman beside him stands ready for action as he confirms understanding of the Highness's command. The blonde-haired man stands with a sharp, intense expression and a bead of sweat on his temple as the hooded figure looms in the background behind him. The masked figure in the hood stares forward with intense blue eyes, his expression cold and focused as a shadowy presence looms behind him. A white-haired man in a mask stares down at three bound captives, while the blonde knight behind them sighs heavily as the wind whips through their dark clothes. The blonde knight places a hand on the orange-haired prince's shoulder and apologizes for hitting him, while the prince looks away with a frustrated expression. The blonde knight delivers a swift backhand to the red-haired man's jaw, snapping his head sideways and interrupting his sentence as he demands silence. The blonde man in the blue coat shouts that hitting him while he is still talking is cheating, as the surrounding crowd watches with shock and surprise. The man stares forward with glowing red eyes and a sharp mark on his cheek, while demanding to know what is happening, his expression tight with shock. A commanding voice orders the group to enter without mind games and follow instructions, while the assembled figures stand at attention before a vast mountainous landscape. The three-eyed ogre emerges from his rocky shell with a snarl, his red eyes burning and fangs bared as the air crackles with raw power around him. The armored man stands with his hands on his hips and stares down the protagonist, while the red-haired woman looks on from beside him, as a voice demands an answer in the tense silence. The character clutches their chest in sharp pain, their hand pressing against the armor as a jagged white crack flashes across the fabric, signaling an immediate and violent impact. A group of 6 figures stands at the mouth of a cavern filled with jagged stalactites, their silhouettes framed by blinding light from beyond as one commands they move in, casting long shadows into the dark interior. A muscular man lies motionless on the rocky ground with his arms spread wide and a mask resting on his chest, while a heavy axe rests beside him in the cold air. The stone-faced giant roars in pain as a jagged blade pierces its eye, while the monster's red pupil widens and blood wells beneath the fractured rock, the sound of impact ringing through the air. A massive explosion engulfs the battlefield in a blinding white flash, shattering the ground and sending debris flying as smoke billows outward. A towering armored warrior stands atop a mountain of skulls and looms over the army below, his massive form casting a shadow that engulfs the battlefield as rain pours down. A muscular man in armor crouches atop a mound of bones while gripping an axe and holding a skull mask, as he stands ready to face the swordsman below. The young man grips his sword with a tense jaw and beads of sweat on his brow, while demanding that the enemy show themselves or face death as shadows loom behind him. The man grits his teeth and narrows his eyes in fury, while baring them in a snarl of pure rage as the air around him vibrates with tension. A hand grips a wrist tightly, fingers pressing deep into the fabric of the sleeve, as pain echoes through the silent air. The leader stands at the forefront with his sword raised, flanked by 2 armed comrades in blue uniforms, as he demands they hold their ground against the encroaching threat. A man with white hair screams in the foreground while a masked blonde man and a purple-haired person look on, as rain falls heavily around them. A sharp projectile tears through the air with blinding speed, scattering debris as it leaves a trail of blue energy in its wake. The hooded man with the scarred eye glares forward and demands that they move, while his masked followers stand at attention behind him. A figure grips a massive axe and prepares to swing, while spectral birds burst from the frozen ground in a chaotic rush of blue energy. The swordsman swings his blade in a sharp arc and cleaves through the monster's arm, sending sparks flying as the beast roars in pain. A bearded warrior in dark armor charges forward with a massive axe, smashing into the ground and sending a shockwave of ice shards outward as he roars for battle. A grotesque figure with a distorted face screams as a blinding beam of energy strikes his eye, sending him reeling backward while the attacker tumbles through the air behind him. A brown eye widens and shudders as a jagged blue energy crackles across its surface, radiating shockwaves through the surrounding darkness. The man stares forward with eyes sharp and focused, his mouth open in a silent scream as the background blurs into motion. A massive armored warrior raises a glowing blade to strike while another figure leaps through the air above, as blue energy slashes erupt across the scene and rain pours down. A man with dark hair stares forward with a cold and intense gaze, his mouth slightly open as if he is demanding the task start by force. A white-haired man in a blue scarf shouts that he will obey while raising his sword against an armored opponent, as the air crackles with violent energy and sound. A hooded figure thrusts a glowing blade into the monster's chest and pins it against the wall, while the creature screams in agony as its body contorts from the pain. A man in a blue vest thrusts his glowing sword forward into the chest of an opponent clad in red, sending bright blue energy streaks across the frame as he drives through their defenses. The massive armored figure roars in pain as 4 warriors strike its limbs with glowing blades, shattering the surrounding stone and sending debris flying through the air. The blond man in armor smiles while observing the swordsmen, remarking that their agility rivals that of the priesthood as the massive monster lunges forward. Kale's face remains frozen in profile with his red eyes wide and unblinking, while he demands that no one approaches the sealed gate tonight, his expression hardening into absolute resolve. The blonde warrior in blue armor crouches with a sword drawn and tells the red-haired mage to begin preparing their magic, while the mage responds that they will comply, as 3 figures stand ready for battle on the icy ground. The armored man twists his massive body in midair, shattering the ground beneath him as he prepares to strike downward. The character's eye widens in shock as a glowing yellow streak strikes the pupil, veins bursting across the white and red shadows deepening around the socket. The boy screams with his mouth wide open, his red eyes filled with terror as a massive shadow looms over him, the air thick with impending doom. The horned giant raises his glowing blade high above his head to strike, while a smaller figure flees into the background and onlookers brace for impact in the tense atmosphere. A man flies backward through the air from a powerful impact, while massive red and blue sound effects explode around him. A woman with long red hair raises a staff engulfed in flames, unleashing a powerful magical attack that fills the air with fire and arcane symbols. A massive ring of fire erupts from the ground and spins through the air as a figure in white braces for impact, while the stone-faced man on the right watches with cold, unblinking eyes. A figure stands engulfed in a blinding explosion of fire and energy, while the ground beneath them shatters into dust and debris under the force of the blast. A beast with glowing red eyes roars in fury as flames engulf its face, the heat of its rage filling the air around it. A beast-like warrior stomps forward through the snow and sends shards of ice flying outward, while shouting that he will crush them all, his massive claws extended in a deadly threat. The red-haired woman stares forward with wide, panicked eyes as a bead of sweat rolls down her cheek, while gasping that she cannot control her body, the atmosphere thick with sudden shock and terror. The horned warrior lunges forward with his blade and pierces the woman's back, while she gasps that he strikes true, blood splashing into the air. The masked warrior thrusts his blade forward and pierces the ogre's eye, while the monster screams in agony as blood sprays from the wound. The muscular warrior swings his massive axe in a blinding arc, sparks flying as the weapon meets an unseen force, while blue impact symbols flare around him to emphasize the violence of the clash. The armored warrior drives his glowing blade into the monster's shoulder and forces it back against the stone wall, as the beast roars in agony while sparks fly from the impact. A muscular man with a bald head and dark markings on his skin stands amidst glowing blue energy streaks, his body tensed as if bracing against an invisible force. The man with blonde hair stares forward with cold intensity as dark energy surges around his hand, the red background throbbing with violent power. The old man's body shatters into blue light and fragments as the energy wave strikes him, while he gasps that his defense has been pierced, his form dissolving into the air. The hooded man stares forward with narrowed eyes and a grim set to his jaw, while demanding that the answer be given now, his voice low and sharp. The blond man stands with the armored companion and red-haired woman, while a figure in dark clothing speaks to them as they listen with serious expressions. The blond man grins and leans in close to the woman while saying that he is ready for whatever comes next, his confidence radiating as she watches with a cold, unreadable expression. A hooded figure stands among a group of cloaked men as the man in white gasps at their sudden arrival, while the leader stares forward with cold intensity. The blond man shrugs with open palms and smirks while asking if they like that, his confident stance radiating challenge against the misty rocky background. A muscular warrior unleashes a fiery attack that erupts around him, while the air crackles with explosive energy. A cloaked figure stands with a glowing weapon at the ready as magical energy erupts around distant combatants, while blue light pulses from their hand in anticipation of battle. A masked man exhales a cloud of blue mist into the darkness, while his eyes narrow with cold focus as he whispers SSSH to himself. The giant swings its massive axe downward and sends the smaller figure flying backward into the ground, while the air crackles with violent kinetic energy. A heavy boot slams into the ground with a thunderous impact, shattering the stone beneath it as dust and debris explode outward. A muscular man wielding a large axe leaps forward through the air and cleaves a figure in half with a powerful downward swing, sending sparks flying as he lands amidst the shattered remains. The masked figure tilts his head slightly and smiles with a cold, knowing expression, while the blue glow of energy flickers behind him in the shadows. 3 armored knights stand in a line before a hooded figure, their weapons glowing with blue energy as the central knight laughs that no escape exists tonight, the air thick with tension and impending violence. A woman with long red hair wields a staff, casting a powerful magical spell that fills the background with glowing runes and arcane energy. The muscular warrior raises his axe and strikes downward with a mighty swing, sending the smaller figure flying through the air while shouting commands to his allies below. The man with orange hair stares at the woman in blue as she raises her glowing hand and summons a burst of pink energy, while a masked warrior lunges forward behind them. The man with red eyes screams in anguish as his face twists in agony, his mouth wide open against a backdrop of chaotic energy. The man with brown hair shouts in anger against a dark red background, his mouth wide open and eyes narrowed with intensity. The hooded man roars in fury, his mouth wide open as if shouting a command, while the stormy blue background crackles with violent energy. The muscular warrior delivers a powerful roundhouse kick that connects with the cloaked figure's head, sending sparks flying as the impact echoes through the rocky canyon. A boy screams in the rain as glowing debris shatters around him, his mouth wide open with a burst of energy erupting from his throat. A golden reptilian eye widens in shock as the pupil constricts sharply, surrounded by vibrating red lines that convey sudden impact. A hooded warrior leaps through the rain with a sword raised high, while below, a monstrous beast with glowing yellow eyes and pointed ears looks up in stunned silence. A figure lies motionless on the shattered ground, their body twisted and broken as a glowing blade pierces the earth nearby, silence hanging heavy over the ruin. Kale leans forward with a fierce expression, his red eyes locked on the opponent below, while demanding that they not dare to challenge him again, the air thick with impending violence. The muscular warrior swings his axe in a wide arc, sending 2 small figures flying backward through the air with visible impact flashes, while the observer watches from behind as snow swirls violently around the battlefield. Kale stares with intense red eyes and sharp focus, his pupils dilated as he locks onto a target ahead, the air thick with sudden tension. The character stares forward with wide, intense eyes as a sudden shockwave ripples around them, while realizing that if this heads into Phase 3, not just they are in danger. The man stands motionless in a red curtain while tremors shake his body, as he demands that the air itself freezes around him. The character's hand clenches into a fist with visible tension, as the air around his knuckles glows faintly, signaling an imminent strike. The armored man places a hand on the other's shoulder while declaring that His Highness's command stands, as snowflakes drift through the cold night air. The blonde man tilts his head with a faint smile, while declaring that the situation is far from over, his eyes sharp with quiet confidence. The blonde man in black armor stands holding his sword while the knight with his back turned faces him, as an unseen speaker demands their attention from above. The blonde knight tilts his head slightly and offers a confident, knowing smile, while the air around him shimmers with magical light. The man with red eyes stares forward in terror, a bead of sweat rolls down his face, and purple energy swirls around him as he trembles. The armored figure collapses to one knee in pain, clutching his side as glowing red energy slashes through the air behind him, while gasping that he cannot breathe, the atmosphere thick with sudden agony and shock. The young man exhales a stream of bubbles into the water, his eyes wide and fixed on something unseen as sweat beads on his brow. A man in a blue and white outfit extends his hand forward with an intense expression, while the back of another person's head is visible in the foreground. A gloved hand grips a sword hilt and draws the blade with a sharp metallic sound, while the weapon flashes with blinding light as it clears its scabbard. The man in blue grabs the kneeling boy by his shoulder and yanks him upward, demanding to know why he was hiding, as tension fills the cold stone air. A man with brown hair stares intensely to the left, his jaw clenched in determination as a dark energy crackles around him. The horned beast roars with glowing red eyes and lunges forward as the masked figure braces for impact, while a sharp cry rings out in the air. A hand grips a glowing blue blade that crackles with electric energy as it slices through the air, sending arcs of lightning spiraling outward in a violent display of power. A figure with white hair spins in a blur of motion, generating a powerful whirlwind that shatters the ground beneath them as blue energy arcs outward. A man bursts through a swirling vortex of blue lightning and demands that no one stands in his way, while the observer watches with wide-eyed shock. The armored warrior stomps his massive foot into the earth and unleashes a shockwave that shatters the ground around him, while screaming that he will crush all who oppose him, sending debris flying in every direction. The man with brown hair screams in anguish, his face contorted in pain as he shouts that he cannot accept this fate, the background streaking with violent speed lines to emphasize his emotional turmoil. The horned warrior charges through a massive fireball and erupts forward with a roar, his body wreathed in flames as he drives toward his target. The man stares forward with narrowed eyes as golden flames erupt around him, his expression hardening into cold resolve. The character's eye widens in shock behind a cracked white mask as red symbols flash across the glass, while falling debris illuminates the sudden tension. The three-eyed demon raises his flaming scythe high and roars with fury, while while the man below braces for impact as fire engulfs the air around them. The character stomps forward with such force that sparks fly from the ground beneath their boots, while screaming in a furious outburst. A figure swings a glowing blade downward and splits through the center of the scene, sending arcs of blue lightning outward while surrounded by violent motion lines and pink impact effects. A man with brown hair screams in agony as blood splatters across his face, while the air around him vibrates with a violent purple aura. A muscular warrior with a red beard raises his axe high as purple energy swirls around him, while he asks if this is the end. The boy stares upward with wide, dilated eyes as a massive dark eye looms above him, while he whispers that it is scary, his body tense in absolute fear. A muscular man with a red beard and horns is struck by a massive, glowing blue energy wave that sends him flying backward through the air, his body contorting in pain as he screams. The hooded figure raises a sword above the man's head and drives it downward, as the man screams in terror while his eyes widen with shock. The man in the dark hood narrows his blue eyes with a grimace, while demanding to know who dares challenge him, his voice sharp with immediate hostility. A hooded figure raises a glowing blue blade and demands Asura, while sparks fly from the clash, his face twisted in rage. The beast roars in agony as a glowing blue blade pierces through its skull, sending sparks flying and cracking the air with electric energy. A golden eye with a cracked pupil stares forward as red cracks spread across the vision, radiating tension through the fractured surface. A horned warrior roars as a massive explosion erupts behind him, sending flames engulfing his armored form while he braces against the fiery blast. The man with reddish-brown hair stares forward with intense red eyes and a sharp, confident smile as he demands that the opponent prepare to face his overwhelming power, while a crackling energy aura erupts around his shoulders. A blond man raises his gloved hand and gives a thumbs up, while shouting that it is good, as the air shimmers with magical energy around them. The red-haired woman turns her head with a sharp smile and demands that her disciple watch closely as she declares this is what magic truly is, while a figure burns in flames behind her. The character's eyes squeeze shut in sharp pain, their brows furrowing deeply as a sound of distress erupts around them. The horned warrior stands engulfed in crackling pink energy while declaring that they have finally reached Phase 3, his massive frame radiating power through the stormy atmosphere. The character stares with intense, glowing red eyes, his gaze fixed and unblinking as a surge of raw power radiates from his pupils. A squad of warriors stands ready with drawn blades facing the towering armored figure, while the sky darkens around them as a massive red energy beam descends from above. The bearded man screams in agony as red lightning erupts around his body, while his veins bulge with painful power. The character's eye widens in shock, veins bursting across the skin as their pupils contract to a slit, while a violent sound effect screams through the air. A figure in dark armor stands with a sword at his side and stares upward at the colossal, glowing eye that dominates the violet sky, its vertical pupil burning like a beacon of judgment. The young man with red eyes stares forward with intense focus, a bead of sweat forming on his temple as he holds the blade steady against the dark background. A figure's face distorts into a grotesque mask with a bulging, bloodshot eye, as dark smoke swirls around the edges and a blue interface glows faintly at the bottom. Kale opens his mouth in a silent scream, his red eyes wide with shock as the world around him shatters into digital fragments. The demonic figure roars with its single glowing eye wide open and purple energy swirling around its face, while the red background pulses with violent intensity. A massive armored warrior descends with a glowing sword while purple energy swirls around him, his eyes locked on the opponent below. A dark, jagged rock shatters in midair with explosive force as purple energy erupts from its center, sending shards flying outward into the void. A man with a drop of sweat on his cheek stares forward, his mouth slightly parted as he demands to know the meaning of this situation, tension gripping the air. A blonde knight holds a sword and looks back with a grim expression as his comrade stumbles forward toward the fallen figure, while another character gasps that Your Highness is in danger amidst the swirling dark energy. The armored figure drives his knee into the fallen man's chest and pins him to the stone floor, while demanding that he confess everything now, the air thick with violence. A hooded warrior stands atop a jagged rock with sword drawn, as the ground trembles beneath his feet and dust swirls around him. A man with purple hair turns to face a masked figure while speaking in reported speech, as the air shimmers with tension and distant figures stand amidst swirling mist. The masked figure in the dark hood stares forward with intense focus while the white-haired man behind him smiles with a knowing expression, as wind rushes past them through the shadowed ruins. The man in the blue tunic stands with his back to the viewer, facing a hooded figure who smiles grimly as he demands that the screaming prisoner be dealt with immediately, leaving the ground slick with blood and terror. The young man with red eyes stares forward with an intense, focused expression as a vibrant purple energy swirls behind him. The pink-haired man stares at the hooded figure emerging from purple mist, while thinking what is wrong with him as the air grows heavy with tension. A pale face emerges from shadow with lips slightly parted as if speaking, while the dark background suggests a tense or secretive atmosphere. The cloaked figure turns sharply with a weapon drawn and demands what the blonde man is doing, while the blonde man stares back with wide eyes and a tense expression. The man with reddish-brown hair stares forward with intense red eyes and a furrowed brow, his expression hardening into cold determination as he demands answers about the truth behind the recent events. The character's sharp jawline catches a sliver of light, the glow emphasizing the severity of their expression. The cloaked figure with white hair and a blue mask smirks in the dim light, his eyes gleaming with quiet menace. The young man with orange hair stares upward with a sharp, focused gaze, his mouth slightly parted as if he is about to speak or has just finished speaking. A figure with light hair stands in the foreground and watches another hooded person walk away into a bright, misty cavern opening, as an ominous shadow looms above. A group of figures stands with their backs to the viewer and gazes into a cavernous chamber where jagged icicles hang from the ceiling and dust motes drift in shafts of cold blue light. The central warrior stands flanked by two companions, his red eyes glowing with intensity as he demands their immediate attention, the air thick with tension and readiness for conflict. 5 figures stand in the cavern doorway, their silhouettes framed against the bright exterior as they survey the dimly lit storage room filled with wooden barrels. The man with pink hair smiles smugly at the dark-haired man, who stands behind him looking confused with a question mark floating above his head. The character stares with narrowed golden eyes and a furrowed brow, while a bead of sweat rolls down their cheek as they demand an explanation for the sudden shift in tone. A squad of masked figures emerges from the stone tunnel entrance, their arrival silencing the prisoners huddled against the walls as a blue sound effect echoes through the cavern. The hooded man glares with narrowed eyes while standing beside the blonde-haired man, his gaze sharp and unyielding as speed lines streak through the air around them. The man leans forward with a smug grin and demands to know why she is crying, while the woman stands bound by ropes with tears streaming down her face in the dim stone chamber. The hooded figure spreads his arms wide and declares that Ulam, his expression radiant with triumph as golden light surrounds him. A man in a blue and white outfit gasps with wide eyes as lines of shock ripple around him, his expression frozen in sudden alarm. 3 captives stand with their hands bound in front of them, their faces pale and eyes wide with shock as they stare into the dim light. A man stares with a furrowed brow and parted lips, his face half shrouded in shadow as he demands an answer from the darkness. A person's bound hands are pulled taut, their struggle accompanied by a cry of pain, as indicated by the glowing red Korean text. A man with short hair shouts while pointing forward, his face contorted in rage as he demands an answer, the air thick with tension. The man stands rigid with his back to the group, trembling violently in the cold air as he demands that they leave him alone, his body shaking uncontrollably from fear. The young man stands motionless with a shadowed expression as purple energy swirls around him, his eyes hollow and distant. A man with darkened eyes grins menacingly while sweat beads on his face, as white energy lines crackle around him and a glowing light rises from below. A man with spiky hair screams that he would rather die than accept help from the people while crying, his voice echoing as force is told to get lost. The dark-haired figure looms over the purple-haired boy with a tear on his cheek, while the boy looks up in shock and fear. The blonde boy with red eyes looks up from the rubble while shouting that they are not finished yet, his voice echoing through the dark cavern. A blonde man stands before a group of onlookers in a cavernous hall, while his voice echoes through the space as shadows stretch across the stone floor. Kale stands in profile against a stone wall, his gaze fixed forward with a steady expression as he demands answers from the shadows. A man in blue kneels and bows his head before a group of onlookers, while another man watches with an expression of shock. The man stares forward with wide, fearful eyes, and a bead of sweat rolls down his cheek as he trembles in the cold air. The central prisoner stands with bound hands, his mouth open in a cry of despair as the crowd behind him watches in silence, shadows looming over their fearful faces. The gathered men freeze in shock and whisper their disbelief at the arrival of the third prince, while one murmurs that he is a drunken troublemaker. A group of students in dark uniforms stands with their backs to the foreground, facing a brilliant, shimmering light that fills the space before them, as glowing blue letters float around them. The man with the ponytail grabs the other man by his collar and demands that he listen, as the victim winces in pain. The man squeezes his eyes shut and grits his teeth as a tear rolls down his cheek, while the air around him shimmers with fractured light. A blonde man in a dark jacket with armored shoulder pads stands with his back to the viewer, facing a blurred crowd of figures under dim blue lighting. The three-eyed ogre roars with bared fangs and demands that no one defeat Gromhart, as his monstrous face twists in violent fury against a dark purple backdrop. A clawed hand crushes the ground, splintering stone and blood beneath its weight, as the dark atmosphere swells with violent power. A spherical elixir of strength floats in a glowing purple void with red tendrils trailing downward, as the item description states it greatly boosts the user's physical strength for a short time. The man keeps his eyes shut and his mouth set in a tight line as light pierces through his hair, his face remaining still against the dark background. A man with blonde hair bows his head in a deep, respectful gesture toward a figure standing nearby, as he whispers that Your Highness into the air. The boy with pink hair stares forward with glowing red eyes, his mouth slightly open as if he is about to speak or gasp, while a soft purple light illuminates the space around him. A man with short gray hair and a weary expression speaks while looking forward, his voice carrying a tone of quiet resolve. The blonde-haired man stands with a tense expression as sweat beads on his forehead, while the silver-haired man beside him trembles violently and sweats profusely in the cold, dimly lit environment. The man presses his hands together in desperation and sobs while begging for mercy, his tears streaming down his face as the blue light intensifies around him. The blonde knight holds the bound arm of a kneeling figure in a dimly lit cave, while the captive declares that he won't forget as glowing embers rise around them. A figure stands still in the dimly lit room, their boots planted firmly on the wooden floor as the background blurs into shadow and uncertainty. The armored man with blonde hair stares down at the kneeling subordinate with a stern expression, while the subordinate replies in reported speech that he will obey the commander's orders. The young man keeps his eyes closed and offers a faint, knowing smile as the shadows of the setting sun wash over his face, leaving an air of quiet confidence in the dimming light. A man with brown hair stares forward with narrowed eyes and a slight smirk, while demanding to know who dares challenge him, his expression radiating cold arrogance. A sharp-edged object descends toward a person's face while speech bubbles float nearby, the atmosphere thick with impending violence and tension. The armored man with blonde hair charges forward through the air while his purple cape billows behind him, as a bystander watches from the background. A large white tent stands in a clearing with its interior light glowing warmly, while sandbags stack against a wooden fence and dense trees fill the background under soft purple lighting. Kale braces himself against the invisible pressure and grits his teeth as the air crackles with blue energy around him, his armor trembling from the force. The seated blonde man grips the table edge while staring up at the armored knight, as the red-haired woman stands beside him with a sharp, knowing smile. A blonde knight in white armor steps forward through the curtain with a smirk, while the red-haired man watches him approach, his expression tense. The armored man with the blue scarf stares down at the seated figure from behind, his gloved hand resting near the chair as he demands an explanation for their presence in the room, while the air thickens with a heavy silence. The blonde man stands motionless in his dark armor with a flush on his cheeks, while he demands that no one approaches him tonight. The blonde man with the goatee stares forward with a smug expression, while pink text flashes around him as he demands that no one enter his presence tonight. The armored knight grips the table edge with trembling hands while purple energy surges around him, his eyes burning with suppressed rage as he demands answers. A blonde man kneels with a stern expression while two armored figures stand behind him, one of whom grips his shoulder firmly as he demands to know who dares challenge their authority. A blonde man in armor rests his chin on his hands at the table while asking if someone tries to stop him, as another figure leans forward and questions what happens if he tries to stop you. The blonde man stares down the younger character with cold intensity as he demands that he cut him down and go anyway, while the air thickens with dangerous resolve. The blonde man narrows his eyes and furrows his brow in disbelief, as he demands to know what insane thing is happening next, the air thick with confusion. The blonde man clutches his temple in sharp pain, while gritting that the pressure is unbearable, his face contorted with agony. The armored man with glowing eyes leans forward and whispers into a phone, while the seated man watches silently as purple energy pulses around them. The character's jaw clenches tight, while the sound of grinding teeth echoes through the air, his expression twisted in silent rage. A man with blonde hair and a goatee stares forward with intense, narrowed eyes, his mouth slightly open as if he is demanding an answer or issuing a sharp warning. Three figures stand atop a wooden platform while a fourth lies prone below, hands pressed against the surface as if bracing himself. The blonde man with red eyes stares forward with a cold, unyielding expression, his jaw set in silent determination as the dim light casts sharp shadows across his face. The armored man grits his teeth in fury, his eyes burning with rage as purple energy surges around him. The armored man stands behind the table with a smirk, while his blonde companion looks on silently as he admits that if the situation was meant to provoke him, it worked, his tone heavy with frustration.